Hello everyone, and welcome back to Mr. Sleepy Crime. I know many of you enjoy listening to these stories as you fall asleep. So before you drift off, I'd love for you to leave a comment letting me know where in the world you're tuning in from. And if you're enjoying the story, don't forget to like and subscribe, it really helps the channel grow. Before we begin, I want to acknowledge that this story involves real people and real tragedies. We tell these stories not for entertainment, but to remember the victims and perhaps help others recognize the warning signs that could prevent similar tragedies. For the best experience, feel free to lower the volume a little, just enough to let the story gently carry you off to sleep. Alright, please get comfortable, dim the lights, and let's dive into tonight's first story. Tonight, we journey to Warren, Michigan, where the beginning of 2025 brought with it a mystery that would grip a community and reveal the dark underbelly of a relationship gone terribly wrong. This is the story of Ashley Elkins, a 30-year-old mother whose morning errand run became the beginning of a case that would span months of investigation, heartbreak, and ultimately, justice. As the clock strikes another late hour and you settle in for the night, let me tell you about Ashley, a woman whose life was cut short, whose story deserves to be told, and whose case reminds us that sometimes the people closest to us can harbor the darkest secrets. Ashley Lachey Elkins was 30 years old when her story intersected with ours. Living in Warren, Michigan, on Knox Avenue, she was the kind of person who lit up a room when she entered. Ashley was a devoted mother to 2 children, the center of a close-knit family that included her mother, Monica Elkins, and her younger sister, who looked up to Ashley as both sibling and role model. Warren, Michigan, sits in Macomb County, part of the greater Detroit metropolitan area. It's a working-class community where families like Ashley's have deep roots, where neighbors know each other's names, and where a missing person doesn't go unnoticed for long. Ashley had built her life here, creating a safe space for her children and maintaining the kind of routine that working mothers everywhere would recognize. But like many modern relationships, Ashley's personal life had its complications. She had recently ended a relationship with a man named DeAndre Booker, 32 years old, who lived in nearby Roseville. Their breakup, as we would later learn, had not been as clean or as final as Ashley might have hoped. In the days leading up to January 2, 2025, Ashley's life appeared normal to those around her. She was making plans, running her household, caring for her children. She had recently purchased a gray 2010 Chevrolet Malibu, a practical car for a practical woman who needed reliable transportation for her family. She was in the process of registering the vehicle, one of those mundane adult tasks that we all procrastinate on, never imagining that such a small detail might one day become crucial evidence in a criminal investigation. January 2, 2025, dawned like any other winter morning in Michigan. The holidays were over, people were settling back into their routines, and Ashley Elkins was preparing for what should have been an ordinary day. At approximately 8:30 in the morning, Ashley told her family she was heading out to run errands. It was the kind of announcement that happens in households across America every day, casual, routine, unremarkable. Her younger sister was the last family member to see Ashley alive. There was no dramatic goodbye, no sense of foreboding, no indication that this ordinary morning would be anything but ordinary. Ashley climbed into her gray Chevrolet Malibu, the one without license plates yet, still bearing the temporary tags of a recent purchase, and drove away from her home on Knox Avenue. What Ashley planned to accomplish that morning remains partly a mystery. Running errands could mean anything: grocery shopping, post office visits, perhaps stopping by the bank or picking up prescriptions. These are the mundane details of adult life that we rarely document or remember with precision, yet they would become incredibly important as investigators tried to piece together Ashley's final hours. But there was one destination that Ashley's phone would later reveal, one stop that would transform this story from a simple missing person case into something far more sinister. According to cell phone data that investigators would later analyze, Ashley's last known location was at an apartment complex in Roseville, Michigan. Specifically, her phone had last pinged at the 20900 block of Pinehurst Street. This was the address where her ex-boyfriend, DeAndre Booker, lived. By evening, Ashley's absence had transformed from routine to concerning. A mother of two doesn't simply disappear without explanation. She doesn't ignore calls from family members or fail to return home for her children without a very good reason, or without something terrible having happened. Monica Elkins, Ashley's mother, felt that familiar knot of worry that every parent knows. When adult children don't answer their phones, there's always that moment of decision: do you wait a little longer, or do you act on your instincts? Monica chose to trust her maternal instincts, and those instincts were screaming that something was wrong. The family began making phone calls, reaching out to Ashley's friends, checking with anyone who might have seen or heard from her. They called Ashley's phone repeatedly, listening to it ring and go to voicemail, each unanswered call adding to their growing alarm. In our hyper-connected world, it's almost impossible for someone to simply vanish without a trace, unless something has prevented them from responding. When January 3rd dawned without any word from Ashley, the family knew they needed help. They contacted the Warren Police Department, officially reporting Ashley Elkins as a missing person. This formal report would trigger an investigation that would ultimately involve multiple police agencies, hundreds of hours of detective work, and a search effort that would span several counties. The initial missing person report painted the picture of a responsible adult who had simply vanished. Ashley was described as 30 years old, a mother of two, driving a gray 2010 Chevrolet Malibu with no license plates, just temporary tags from her recent purchase. The car detail would prove crucial, as it made the vehicle more distinctive and easier to spot. Warren police began their investigation with the standard protocols for missing adults. Unlike missing children cases, adult disappearances are often complicated by the fact that adults have the legal right to disappear if they choose to. Law enforcement has to balance the genuine concern of family members with the reality that sometimes people walk away from their lives voluntarily. However, everything about Ashley's situation suggested that this was not a voluntary disappearance. Detective work in missing person cases often feels like assembling a jigsaw puzzle with half the pieces missing and no picture on the box to guide you. Investigators from the Warren Police Department began building a timeline of Ashley's activities, trying to trace her movements from the moment she left her house until, whenever that last moment was. The cell phone data provided the first crucial lead. In our digital age, our phones create an electronic breadcrumb trail that investigators can follow, and Ashley's phone told a story that her family found deeply troubling. The last ping had come from the area of her ex-boyfriend's apartment complex in Roseville. This meant that whatever had happened to Ashley, it had likely occurred at or near DeAndre Booker's residence. Roseville police were brought into the investigation, as jurisdiction matters in criminal cases, and the evidence was pointing toward events that had occurred in their city. The collaboration between Warren and Roseville police departments would prove essential as the case developed, demonstrating the kind of interagency cooperation that modern criminal investigations require. Meanwhile, Ashley's family was doing what families do when a loved one goes missing, everything in their power to find her. Monica Elkins made heartfelt pleas to the media, asking for the public's help in finding her daughter. These appeals painted a picture of Ashley as a loving mother and devoted family member, someone who would never voluntarily disappear and leave her children behind. The family organized search efforts, distributed flyers, and used social media to spread Ashley's picture and information. In today's world, missing person cases often become community efforts, with strangers joining the search for someone they've never met but whose story has touched them. Ashley's case was no different. Her disappearance resonated with people throughout the Detroit metropolitan area. But while the community searched and the family hoped, investigators were beginning to focus on DeAndre Booker with increasing intensity. The cell phone evidence was just the beginning. As they dug deeper into the relationship between Ashley and her ex-boyfriend, a more complex and troubling picture began to emerge. DeAndre Booker was 32 years old and lived in an apartment on Pinehurst Street in Roseville. Like many relationships that end badly, his connection to Ashley was complicated by shared history, unresolved feelings, and the kind of emotional dynamics that can turn toxic when one person can't accept that the relationship is over. Investigators began conducting interviews with Booker, initially as someone who might have information about Ashley's whereabouts rather than as a suspect in her disappearance. These early conversations would later prove significant, as inconsistencies in stories often become crucial evidence in criminal cases. Police also began surveillance of Booker's apartment building, watching for signs of Ashley or her distinctive gray Malibu. In missing person cases, investigators often find that the missing individual's vehicle provides important clues, either because it's found abandoned somewhere significant, or because it's been hidden or disposed of in a way that suggests foul play. On January 8, 6 days after Ashley's disappearance, police made a significant discovery. Ashley's gray 2010 Chevrolet Malibu was found in Roseville. The location of the vehicle and its condition would become important evidence, though specific details about where and how it was discovered were not immediately released to the public as the investigation was still active. The discovery of Ashley's car marked a turning point in the case. When a missing person's vehicle is found but the person remains missing, it usually indicates that the individual didn't drive away voluntarily. Cars don't abandon themselves, someone had to leave that Malibu where police found it, and the question of who that someone was would drive the next phase of the investigation. With the car recovered but Ashley still missing, police intensified their focus on the apartment complex where her phone had last pinged. Multiple police agencies converged on the Pinehurst Street location, spending hours conducting what appeared to be a thorough investigation of the premises. January 8 became a crucial day in the Ashley Elkins investigation when police agencies descended on the apartment complex in Roseville where DeAndre Booker lived. The search was methodical and extensive, the kind of operation that suggests investigators had moved beyond simply looking for a missing person and were now treating the case as a potential homicide. Crime scene investigators understand that apartments can hold countless pieces of evidence, microscopic traces of DNA, blood evidence that someone tried to clean up, fibers, fingerprints, and digital evidence from computers and phones. The search of Booker's apartment would ultimately reveal evidence that transformed this from a missing person case into a murder investigation. During their search, investigators discovered something that changed everything: blood evidence. In the bathroom of Booker's apartment, police found blood that would later be tested and confirmed through DNA analysis to belong to Ashley Elkins. The presence of Ashley's blood in her ex-boyfriend's apartment was the kind of evidence that investigators had hoped they wouldn't find, but which told a story that Ashley's family had feared from the beginning. The blood wasn't the only evidence found during the search. Investigators also discovered what they described as 3 specific items in the bathtub drain, evidence that suggested someone had tried to clean up after whatever had happened in that bathroom. While the exact nature of these items wasn't immediately disclosed to protect the integrity of the investigation, their discovery indicated that significant effort had been made to eliminate evidence of a crime. For Ashley's family, the news that her blood had been found in her ex-boyfriend's apartment was devastating but not entirely surprising. They had sensed from the beginning that Ashley's disappearance was not voluntary, and the evidence seemed to confirm their worst fears about what had happened to their daughter, sister, and mother. The investigation now had physical evidence linking Ashley to her ex-boyfriend's apartment, but Ashley herself remained missing. This created the challenging situation that prosecutors and investigators face in cases where they have evidence of a crime but no body, building a case for murder without the victim present. On January 9, 2025, exactly 1 week after Ashley Elkins had left her home to run errands, police arrested DeAndre Booker. The arrest came after investigators had gathered sufficient evidence to believe that Booker was responsible for Ashley's disappearance and likely death. Initially, Booker was charged with lying to police in connection with the investigation. This charge often serves as a holding charge while investigators continue building a more comprehensive case. Lying to police during a criminal investigation is a serious offense, but everyone involved knew that this charge was likely just the beginning of Booker's legal troubles. The arrest provided some sense of relief to Ashley's family, who had been living in agonizing uncertainty for a week. While they still didn't know exactly what had happened to Ashley or where she was, they at least knew that the person they believed was responsible was in custody and couldn't harm anyone else. However, significant questions remained. If Ashley had been murdered, where was her body? What exactly had happened in that apartment bathroom? How had Booker disposed of Ashley's remains? These questions would drive the next phase of the investigation and would ultimately lead to one of the most extensive searches in recent Michigan criminal history. The arrest also marked the beginning of what would become a complex legal process. Building a murder case without a body presents unique challenges for prosecutors. They need to prove not only that a crime occurred, but that the crime resulted in death, and that the defendant was responsible, all without the primary piece of evidence that most murder cases depend on. For the community following Ashley's case, Booker's arrest was both a relief and a reminder that Ashley was still missing. Justice for Ashley would require more than just an arrest, it would require finding her and holding her killer accountable in court. With DeAndre Booker in custody, investigators faced the daunting task of determining what he had done with Ashley's body. This phase of the investigation would require resources, technology, and sheer determination as law enforcement agencies worked to bring Ashley home to her family. The search efforts expanded beyond the apartment complex and began to encompass a much wider area. Investigators had to think like someone trying to dispose of evidence. Where would someone take a body to ensure it wouldn't be found? The answer, unfortunately, often involves locations that are difficult and expensive to search. Police began focusing on landfills, those vast expanses of waste where evidence can be buried under tons of garbage and debris. Landfill searches represent some of the most challenging and resource-intensive investigations that law enforcement can undertake. They require specialized equipment, extensive manpower, and can take weeks or months to complete. In January 2025, authorities began searching the Pine Tree landfill in Lenox Township, Macomb County. This location had gained notoriety in recent years as the site of another extensive search, the unsuccessful hunt for 17-year-old Zion Foster, an East Point High School student who had disappeared in January 2022. The parallels between the cases were troubling and highlighted the tragic reality that young women in the Detroit area had been disappearing and that their remains were being hidden in ways designed to prevent their families from ever finding closure. The landfill search for Ashley Elkins was methodical and thorough, involving Detroit police officers and other investigators who sifted through tons of waste in frigid January weather. Each day that passed without finding Ashley was another day of anguish for her family and another indication of the challenges that investigators faced. Landfill searches are complicated by the sheer volume of material that must be examined and by the fact that evidence can decompose or be scattered by the normal operations of the facility. Items that enter a landfill are usually buried under layers of other waste, making systematic searching extremely difficult. After days of intensive searching, authorities concluded the landfill search without finding Ashley's remains. This outcome, while disappointing, didn't diminish the case against DeAndre Booker. Investigators had other evidence to work with, and prosecutors were preparing to move forward even without recovering Ashley's body. While the physical search for Ashley continued, investigators were building a comprehensive criminal case against DeAndre Booker. This process involved analyzing all the evidence they had gathered, conducting additional interviews, and consulting with digital forensics experts who could examine electronic evidence from phones, computers, and other devices. One crucial element of the case involved Booker's internet search history in the days surrounding Ashley's disappearance. Digital forensics investigators discovered that Booker had conducted internet searches that were highly relevant to the case. While the specific details of these searches weren't immediately released to protect the integrity of the prosecution, the timing and nature of the searches would become important evidence demonstrating premeditation and consciousness of guilt. Internet search histories have become powerful evidence in modern criminal cases. When someone searches for information about disposing of bodies, cleaning up blood evidence, or other crime-related topics around the time a crime occurs, those searches can provide insight into the person's state of mind and intentions. Investigators also continued to process the physical evidence from Booker's apartment. The blood evidence that had been found in the bathroom underwent extensive DNA analysis to confirm that it belonged to Ashley and to determine the quantity and patterns of the blood. This analysis could provide crucial information about what had happened in that bathroom and the severity of the violence that Ashley had experienced. The 3 items found in the bathtub drain also underwent forensic analysis. While investigators didn't immediately reveal what these items were, their presence in the drain suggested that someone had attempted to clean up evidence of a crime and had not been entirely successful. In criminal investigations, perpetrators often assume they've eliminated all evidence when in fact they've left behind traces that forensic experts can detect and analyze. Throughout this process, Ashley's family continued to live with the agonizing uncertainty of not knowing exactly what had happened to their loved one or where she was. The criminal justice system moves slowly and deliberately, which can be frustrating for families who want answers and closure immediately. On January 31, 2025, nearly a month after Ashley's disappearance, prosecutors felt they had sufficient evidence to file formal charges against DeAndre Booker. The charges were serious and comprehensive, reflecting the severity of the crimes that investigators believed had occurred. Booker was formally arraigned on charges of first-degree premeditated murder, tampering with evidence, disinterment or mutilation of a dead body, and concealing the death of an individual. Each of these charges told part of the story that prosecutors believed had unfolded in Booker's apartment and in the aftermath of Ashley's death. The first-degree premeditated murder charge was the most serious, carrying the possibility of life in prison without parole. This charge requires prosecutors to prove not only that Booker killed Ashley, but that he planned the murder in advance. The evidence supporting premeditation would likely include the internet searches that Booker had conducted and other evidence of planning and preparation. The tampering with evidence charge reflected the efforts that investigators believed Booker had made to cover up his crimes. This could include the cleanup efforts in the bathroom, the disposal of Ashley's body, and any other actions taken to prevent law enforcement from discovering evidence of the murder. The disinterment or mutilation of a dead body charge was particularly disturbing, suggesting that Booker had not simply killed Ashley but had then done something to her remains. This charge often involves moving a body from one location to another or altering the body in some way to prevent identification or to facilitate disposal. Finally, the concealing the death of an individual charge addressed Booker's failure to report Ashley's death and his apparent efforts to hide the fact that she had died. This charge recognizes that even if someone dies accidentally, there are legal obligations to report the death to authorities. The arraignment marked a significant milestone in the case, formally transforming it from an investigation into a prosecution. Booker now faced the full weight of the criminal justice system, with prosecutors prepared to present evidence of his guilt to a jury. The preliminary hearing in the Ashley Elkins murder case began in August 2025, more than 6 months after the charges had been filed. Preliminary hearings serve as a crucial step in the criminal justice process, allowing a judge to determine whether there is sufficient evidence to proceed to trial. During the preliminary hearing, prosecutors began revealing the evidence they had gathered against DeAndre Booker. This included testimony about the blood evidence found in Booker's bathroom, the items discovered in the bathtub drain, and the digital evidence from Booker's electronic devices. Family members testified about Ashley's character and their concerns when she failed to return home. These emotional testimonies helped establish that Ashley's disappearance was completely out of character and that she would never have voluntarily abandoned her children or family. Police officers testified about their investigation, describing the discovery of Ashley's car, the search of Booker's apartment, and the evidence they had collected. This testimony provided the factual foundation for the charges against Booker and demonstrated the thoroughness of the investigation. The preliminary hearing also revealed additional details about the evidence that investigators had gathered. While prosecutors were careful not to reveal everything in their case, they presented sufficient evidence to convince the judge that there was probable cause to believe that Booker had committed the crimes with which he was charged. One of the most significant pieces of evidence discussed during the hearing was the DNA confirmation that the blood found in Booker's bathroom belonged to Ashley. This evidence directly linked Ashley to the location where prosecutors alleged she had been murdered, and it contradicted any potential claim by the defense that Ashley had never been in the apartment. The preliminary hearing process allows the defense to cross-examine witnesses and challenge the evidence, but it's not a full trial. The standard of proof is lower. Prosecutors only need to show probable cause rather than proof beyond a reasonable doubt. However, the hearing provides insight into the strength of the case and the evidence that will likely be presented at trial. One question that arose during the preliminary hearing process was whether other people might have been involved in Ashley's murder. Prosecutors were asked about the possibility of additional suspects, and their responses suggested that the investigation had focused primarily on DeAndre Booker as the sole perpetrator. This question is significant because murder cases sometimes involve multiple perpetrators, especially when it comes to disposing of a body. The logistics of moving and hiding a body can be challenging for one person, leading investigators to consider whether Booker might have had help. However, the evidence presented at the preliminary hearing appeared to support the theory that Booker had acted alone. While investigators had undoubtedly considered the possibility of accomplices, they had not filed charges against anyone else, suggesting that they believed Booker was solely responsible for Ashley's death and disappearance. The question of additional suspects also raised issues about Ashley's body and where it might be located. If Booker had acted alone, he would have been responsible for disposing of Ashley's remains by himself, which might limit the possible locations where she could have been hidden. For Ashley's family, the question of whether others were involved was probably less important than ensuring that the person or people responsible were held accountable. They wanted justice for Ashley, regardless of how many people that justice needed to encompass. The preliminary hearing ultimately concluded with the judge determining that there was sufficient evidence to proceed to trial. This decision meant that the case would move to the next phase of the criminal justice process, where a jury would ultimately determine DeAndre Booker's guilt or innocence. Among the most compelling pieces of evidence against DeAndre Booker were the internet searches he had conducted in the days surrounding Ashley's disappearance. Digital forensics has become an increasingly important part of modern criminal investigations, as people's online activities can provide crucial insight into their intentions and state of mind. The specific nature of Booker's internet searches wasn't fully revealed during the preliminary hearing, as prosecutors typically save their most damaging evidence for trial. However, the timing and relevance of these searches to the case suggested that they would be powerful evidence of premeditation and consciousness of guilt. Internet search history can be particularly damning in criminal cases because it often reveals what someone was thinking about before, during, and after a crime. Searches for information about forensic evidence, body disposal, or cleaning up crime scenes can demonstrate that someone was planning a crime or trying to cover up a crime they had committed. The digital evidence likely extended beyond just internet searches. Investigators probably also analyzed text messages, phone calls, social media activity, and other digital communications that could provide insight into the relationship between Ashley and Booker and the events surrounding her disappearance. Digital evidence has the advantage of being difficult to completely eliminate. Even when someone deletes files or browsing history, forensic experts can often recover the information using specialized software and techniques. This makes digital evidence particularly reliable and difficult for defendants to explain away. For Ashley's family, the digital evidence probably provided some answers about what had happened to their loved one, even if those answers were painful to hear. Understanding the premeditated nature of Ashley's murder would be difficult for her family to process, but it would also strengthen the case for justice. The physical evidence in Ashley's case painted a disturbing picture of violence and attempted cover-up. The blood evidence found in DeAndre Booker's bathroom was the most significant piece of physical evidence, directly linking Ashley to the location where prosecutors alleged she had been murdered. Forensic analysis of blood evidence can reveal important details about a crime. The quantity of blood, its location and pattern, and any attempts to clean it up can all provide insight into what happened and how the perpetrator tried to cover up the crime. The 3 items found in Booker's bathtub drain represented another crucial piece of physical evidence. While the specific nature of these items wasn't revealed during the preliminary hearing, their presence in the drain suggested that someone had attempted to wash away evidence of a crime. Items that are found in drains during criminal investigations often include pieces of evidence that the perpetrator thought had been eliminated but which were actually caught in the plumbing. Crime scene investigators are trained to look for evidence that perpetrators might not think to eliminate or might not be able to completely remove. Microscopic traces of DNA, fingerprints on surfaces that weren't thoroughly cleaned, and fibers or other materials that transferred during the crime can all provide important evidence even when someone has made significant efforts to clean up. The physical evidence in Ashley's case would be crucial at trial because it provided objective, scientific proof of what had occurred. Unlike witness testimony, which can be challenged or disputed, properly collected and analyzed physical evidence is difficult for defense attorneys to explain away. For the prosecution, the physical evidence created a foundation for their case that didn't depend on witness testimony or interpretation. The blood evidence, in particular, provided irrefutable proof that Ashley had been in Booker's apartment and that violence had occurred there. Throughout the investigation and legal proceedings, Ashley Elkins' family demonstrated remarkable strength and determination. Led by her mother, Monica Elkins, the family never gave up hope of finding Ashley and ensuring that justice was served. Monica's public appeals for help in finding Ashley had drawn community support and media attention to the case. Her appearances on local news programs and her social media posts about Ashley kept the case in the public eye and demonstrated the impact that Ashley's disappearance had on those who loved her. Ashley's children, who had lost their mother in such a traumatic way, were supported by their extended family during this difficult time. The impact of domestic violence and murder on children is profound and long-lasting, requiring ongoing support and counseling to help them process their loss and trauma. The broader community in Warren and the surrounding areas had also been affected by Ashley's case. Her disappearance and murder highlighted the ongoing problem of domestic violence and the danger that women face from ex-partners who cannot accept the end of a relationship. Ashley's case became part of a larger conversation about protecting women from domestic violence and ensuring that law enforcement takes threats and stalking behavior seriously. Too often, women who are killed by current or former partners have previously reported concerning behavior that wasn't adequately addressed by the criminal justice system. The community support for Ashley's family was evident throughout the case, from the volunteers who helped search for her to the people who shared her story on social media. This support demonstrated that Ashley's life had meaning beyond her immediate family and that her death had touched many people who had never met her. As the Ashley Elkins case moved toward trial, the legal process continued with various hearings and motions filed by both the prosecution and defense. These proceedings, while often technical and procedural, were crucial for determining what evidence would be admissible at trial and how the case would be presented to the jury. Defense attorneys in murder cases face significant challenges, especially when the evidence appears strong. They must carefully examine all the evidence for potential weaknesses or alternative explanations, while also protecting their clients' constitutional rights throughout the process. The prosecution, meanwhile, continued to build their case and prepare for trial. This involved organizing the evidence they had collected, preparing witnesses to testify, and developing a compelling narrative that would convince a jury of Booker's guilt beyond a reasonable doubt. One of the ongoing challenges in Ashley's case was the fact that her body had never been recovered. While prosecutors can successfully pursue murder cases without a body, these cases are more difficult to prosecute and require particularly strong circumstantial evidence. The absence of Ashley's body also meant that her family couldn't hold a proper funeral or find the closure that comes with laying a loved one to rest. This ongoing uncertainty added to their grief and made the legal process even more difficult to endure. Despite these challenges, prosecutors appeared confident in their case against Booker. The combination of physical evidence, digital evidence, and circumstantial evidence created a strong foundation for a murder conviction, even without Ashley's remains. As we follow Ashley Elkins' case through the criminal justice system, several questions remain unanswered, adding to the complexity and tragedy of her story. The most obvious question is the location of Ashley's remains. Despite extensive searches, including the intensive landfill search, Ashley's body has not been recovered. This raises disturbing questions about what DeAndre Booker did with Ashley's body and whether it will ever be found. For Ashley's family, this uncertainty represents an ongoing source of pain and prevents them from achieving complete closure. The inability to hold a proper funeral or visit Ashley's grave site compounds their grief and makes the healing process more difficult. Another question involves the exact circumstances of Ashley's death. While prosecutors allege that Booker murdered Ashley in his apartment bathroom, the specific details of how she died remain unclear. Understanding these details might provide insight into Booker's motivations and the level of violence involved in the crime. The question of whether Ashley knew she was in danger when she went to Booker's apartment is also significant. Did she go there willingly, thinking she was safe with someone she had once trusted? Or was she somehow coerced or forced to go there? The answers to these questions could affect how we understand Ashley's final moments and the dynamics of her relationship with Booker. There's also the broader question of whether Ashley's murder could have been prevented. Were there warning signs that friends, family, or law enforcement could have recognized and acted upon? Understanding the history of the relationship between Ashley and Booker might provide insights that could help protect other women in similar situations. These unanswered questions don't diminish the strength of the case against Booker, but they do highlight the lasting impact that violent crimes have on families and communities. Some answers may never come, and Ashley's family will have to find ways to live with that uncertainty while pursuing justice for their loved one. Ashley Elkins' case is unfortunately not unique in the landscape of domestic violence and murder in America. Her story reflects patterns that are all too common: a relationship that ended but that one party couldn't accept was over, escalating behavior that culminated in violence, and a woman who paid the ultimate price for someone else's inability to control their emotions and actions. Statistics show that women are most likely to be murdered by current or former intimate partners, and that the period immediately following a breakup is often the most dangerous time for women leaving abusive relationships. Ashley's case fits this pattern, highlighting the ongoing need for better protection and support systems for women who are trying to end relationships with potentially violent partners. The case also demonstrates the importance of digital evidence in modern criminal investigations. The internet searches that Booker conducted provided crucial evidence of his intentions and state of mind, showing how technology can be both a tool for planning crimes and a source of evidence for solving them. Ashley's story has resonated with people throughout Michigan and beyond, partly because it represents fears that many women live with daily. The fear of an ex-partner who won't accept that the relationship is over, who continues to contact or harass them, or who escalates to violence is a reality for many women. The extensive law enforcement response to Ashley's case, including the landfill search and multi-agency investigation, demonstrates the resources that authorities are willing to commit to solving these crimes. However, it also raises questions about whether enough is being done to prevent them from occurring in the first place. Ashley's case has become part of the ongoing conversation about domestic violence prevention, victim protection, and the importance of taking threats and stalking behavior seriously before they escalate to murder. As Ashley Elkins' case continues through the criminal justice system, her family and the broader community are seeking more than just a conviction. They're seeking justice that honors Ashley's memory and provides some measure of closure for those who loved her. Justice in cases like Ashley's is complicated by the fact that no legal outcome can truly restore what was lost. Ashley's children will grow up without their mother, her family will forever live with the trauma of her violent death, and the community has lost a member who should have had many more years to contribute to the lives of those around her. However, holding DeAndre Booker accountable for his crimes is an important step in the healing process. A successful prosecution would validate Ashley's worth as a human being and send a message that violence against women will not be tolerated or ignored. The legal process also provides a forum for Ashley's story to be told in full, ensuring that she is remembered not just as a victim but as a complete person who had hopes, dreams, relationships, and a life that was cut tragically short. For other women who might be in situations similar to what Ashley faced, seeing justice served in her case could provide encouragement to seek help or leave dangerous relationships. It demonstrates that law enforcement and prosecutors take these crimes seriously and will work diligently to hold perpetrators accountable. The pursuit of justice in Ashley's case also honors the work of the many law enforcement officers, forensic experts, prosecutors, and others who have dedicated countless hours to investigating her disappearance and building the case against her accused killer. As we near the end of Ashley Elkins' story, it's important to remember her not just as a victim of violence, but as a complete person who lived, loved, and mattered deeply to those around her. Ashley was 30 years old when her life was cut short, 30 years filled with experiences, relationships, joys, and challenges that shaped who she was as a person, a mother, and a daughter. Ashley's legacy lives on in her two children, who carry forward her love and her memory even as they navigate the difficult reality of growing up without their mother. They will need ongoing support from family, friends, and their community as they process this trauma and find ways to honor their mother's memory while building their own lives. Her mother, Monica Elkins, has shown remarkable strength throughout this ordeal, becoming an advocate not just for justice in Ashley's case but for other families facing similar tragedies. Her public appeals and media appearances have helped keep Ashley's story in the public consciousness and demonstrated the devastating impact that domestic violence has on families and communities. Ashley's case has also contributed to important conversations about domestic violence prevention, victim protection, and the warning signs that friends and family members should watch for. Her story serves as a reminder that domestic violence can affect anyone, regardless of background, and that the period following a breakup can be particularly dangerous for women leaving potentially violent relationships. Tonight, as you drift off to sleep, remember Ashley Elkins not as a statistic or a case number, but as a real person whose life had value and meaning. She was a mother who loved her children, a daughter who was cherished by her family, and a woman whose future was stolen by someone who couldn't accept that their relationship was over. Ashley's story reminds us of the importance of taking domestic violence seriously, of supporting women who are trying to leave dangerous relationships, and of working together as a community to prevent these tragedies from occurring. It also demonstrates the dedication of law enforcement officers, prosecutors, and forensic experts who work tirelessly to seek justice for victims and their families. While Ashley's body has never been recovered, her memory lives on in the hearts of those who loved her and in the ongoing pursuit of justice in her case. The legal proceedings against DeAndre Booker continue as this story is being told, with prosecutors working to ensure that he is held accountable for the crimes he is accused of committing. As you close your eyes tonight, say a quiet prayer or hold a moment of silence for Ashley Elkins, for her children who must grow up without their mother, for her family who continues to grieve her loss, and for all the women whose lives have been cut short by domestic violence. Remember that behind every true crime story is a real person whose life mattered, whose death was a tragedy, and whose story deserves to be told with dignity and respect. Ashley's case remains active in the criminal justice system, and her family continues to seek the justice she deserves. Though her voice was silenced, her story continues to be heard, reminding us all of the precious nature of life and the importance of protecting those who are vulnerable. Rest in peace, Ashley Lachey Elkins. Your story will not be forgotten. Please, if this is your first time listening to one of our true crime stories, welcome to the channel, where we explore these cases in a calm and respectful way. I also want to take a moment to appreciate my amazing subscribers who've been rocking with me. Thank you so much for your continued support. If you're still awake and listening, drop a comment. Let me know where you're tuning in from and the current time in your corner of the world, or just say something to let me know you're still here. And if you haven't already, be sure to like this video and subscribe, so you don't miss our next true crime stories for sleep. Now, let's move on to our second story. Story 2. Sometimes the most horrific stories emerge from the most ordinary places. Cleveland, Ohio, is a city of neighborhoods where people know each other, where children walk to school, and where families have lived for generations. In the Tremont neighborhood, on Seymour Avenue, stood a two-story house that looked like any other. Yellow with white trim, modest and unremarkable. But behind those ordinary walls lay one of the most shocking cases of abduction and captivity in modern American history. This is the story of 3 young women, 3 separate disappearances, and 11 years of unimaginable endurance that would eventually lead to one of the most dramatic rescues ever caught on a 911 call. The year was 2002, and Michelle Knight was 21 years old, though she looked much younger. Life hadn't been kind to Michelle. She'd aged out of foster care, struggled with relationships, and was fighting for custody of her young son. On August 23, Michelle was supposed to appear in court for a custody hearing that could determine whether she'd get to keep her child. That morning, Michelle made her way to the courthouse, but something went wrong with the scheduling. Confused and upset, she found herself walking along West 106th Street and Lorraine Avenue, not far from where she'd grown up. The sun was shining, and she was thinking about her next steps when a school bus pulled up beside her. The driver was a middle-aged Puerto Rican man with a mustache and a friendly demeanor. His name was Ariel Castro, and he worked for the Cleveland School District. He recognized Michelle from the neighborhood and offered her a ride. Michelle, feeling overwhelmed and grateful for the kindness, accepted. Instead of taking her home, Castro drove her to his house on Seymour Avenue. Once inside, everything changed. The friendly bus driver became someone else entirely. He led Michelle to a room upstairs, chained her to a radiator, and told her she wasn't going anywhere. Michelle screamed and fought, but the house was solid, the neighbors distant enough that her cries went unheard. For months, Michelle was alone in that house with Castro. She was kept in a small bedroom, chained and locked away when he wasn't there. Castro would leave for work each morning, driving his school bus route, playing the role of a normal member of the community, while Michelle remained hidden upstairs. The strange thing was, people looked for Michelle at first, but not for long. Her troubled past, her struggles with the system, meant that when she disappeared, many assumed she'd simply run away. The police investigation was minimal. Castro had chosen his first victim well, someone society wouldn't miss too much, someone whose disappearance wouldn't generate sustained attention. Almost exactly a year later, on April 21, 2003, 16-year-old Amanda Berry was finishing her shift at Burger King in Cleveland. Amanda was everything Michelle wasn't in the eyes of society: young, pretty, from a stable family, with her whole life ahead of her. She'd called her sister to pick her up from work, but her sister was running late. Amanda decided to walk home rather than wait. It was a decision that would change everything. As she walked along West 110th and Lorraine, the same intersection where Michelle had been taken, a familiar school bus pulled up. The driver was someone from the neighborhood, someone parents trusted with their children every day. Ariel Castro offered Amanda a ride, just as he had Michelle. But Amanda was more suspicious than Michelle had been. When Castro suggested a detour, when he started driving toward Seymour Avenue instead of toward her home, Amanda became frightened. She tried to get out of the vehicle, but Castro overpowered her. He dragged her into his house, and suddenly Amanda found herself in the same nightmare that Michelle had been living for nearly a year. The reaction to Amanda's disappearance was dramatically different from Michelle's. Amanda came from a loving family who refused to give up. Her mother, Luana Miller, became a fierce advocate for her missing daughter. Candlelight vigils were held, rewards were posted, and Amanda's face appeared on missing person posters throughout Cleveland. The FBI got involved. America's Most Wanted featured Amanda's case. For years, Luana Miller appeared on television, pleading for her daughter's return, never giving up hope even as the years dragged on. Tragically, Luana Miller died of heart failure in 2006, 3 years after Amanda's disappearance, never knowing that her daughter was alive just a few miles away. Gina De Jesus was just 14 years old when she disappeared on April 2, 2004. She was walking home from her middle school with her friend when they reached the point where their paths diverged. Gina's friend offered to walk her all the way home, but Gina said no, she'd be fine for the last few blocks. Those few blocks changed everything. Gina knew Ariel Castro. His daughter Arlene was one of her best friends. She'd been to the Castro house many times for sleepovers and parties. So when Castro pulled up and told Gina that Arlene was at his house waiting for her, she had no reason to doubt him. Castro drove Gina to Seymour Avenue, telling her they'd pick up Arlene and then he'd take them both wherever they wanted to go. But when they arrived at the house, there was no Arlene. Instead, Castro forced Gina inside, and she joined Michelle and Amanda in captivity. Like Amanda, Gina came from a close-knit family who refused to accept that she was simply gone. Her father, Felix de Jesus, became a community activist, organizing searches and keeping Gina's story in the public eye. The family held annual vigils on the anniversary of her disappearance. What made Gina's disappearance even more heartbreaking was the connection to Castro's own family. While Castro was holding Gina prisoner in his house, his daughter Arlene participated in searches for her missing friend. Castro himself even attended some of the vigils and searches, offering comfort to the De Jesus family while keeping their daughter chained in his basement. Inside 2207 Seymour Avenue, the three women endured conditions that are difficult to comprehend. Castro had turned the house into a prison, with locks, chains, and alarms designed to keep his victims contained and hidden from the outside world. The women were kept in different rooms, primarily on the second floor and in the basement. Castro had reinforced doors, installed multiple locks, and covered windows. He'd even rigged alarm systems that would alert him if the women tried to escape while he was away. Each woman's experience was different, but all were subjected to regular sexual assault and psychological torture. Castro controlled every aspect of their lives: what they ate, when they slept, whether they could speak to each other. Sometimes he kept them chained for days at a time. Other times, he allowed them limited movement within the house. Castro was particularly cruel to Michelle, perhaps because she'd been there longest and represented his first successful abduction. She endured the worst physical abuse and was forced to help deliver Amanda's baby when the time came. Yes, during her captivity, Amanda became pregnant. In December 2006, she gave birth to a daughter in that house, with no medical care beyond what Michelle could provide. Castro was the father. The baby, whom he named Jocelyn, became both a source of hope and additional worry for Amanda. How could she escape with a small child? How could she protect her daughter in this environment? The three women developed a bond despite Castro's efforts to keep them isolated from each other. They communicated through the walls, offered each other emotional support, and shared a determination to survive. Michelle became like an older sister to Amanda and Gina, helping them cope with their situation despite her own suffering. Castro maintained his double life with remarkable consistency. During the day, he drove children to school, attended family gatherings, and participated in community events. He even played in a salsa band and was known in the neighborhood as a friendly, if somewhat odd, character. His brothers sometimes visited the house, but Castro kept his captives so well hidden that no one suspected anything. Neighbors occasionally heard strange noises from the house: screaming, banging, what sounded like someone asking for help. But Castro always had explanations. He told people he was watching television loudly, or that he was working on home repairs, or that he had relatives visiting. In a neighborhood where people minded their own business, these explanations were generally accepted. As the years went by, the outside world slowly forgot about the missing women. Michelle had been forgotten almost immediately. Amanda's case remained more prominent, but even that began to fade from public consciousness. Only Gina's family and Amanda's family continued their tireless advocacy. Meanwhile, inside the house, the women adapted to their captivity in ways that allowed them to survive. They developed routines, found ways to exercise, and created mental escapes. Castro allowed them to keep diaries, perhaps as a form of psychological control, and these journals would later provide crucial evidence of their ordeal. Amanda raised her daughter as best she could under impossible circumstances. Jocelyn knew no other world than the house on Seymour Avenue, no other life than the one behind those locked doors. Amanda worked to protect her daughter's innocence while preparing for a day when they might somehow be free. The women aged in captivity. Michelle went from 21 to 32. Amanda went from 16 to 27. Gina went from 14 to 23. They lost their teenage years, their 20s, the time when most people are building careers, relationships, and adult lives. Outside the house, Castro's own family began to fracture. His wife had left him years earlier, taking their children, because of his controlling and violent behavior. His adult children had complicated relationships with him. Some neighbors found him increasingly odd and reclusive. But no one suspected the truth. May 6, 2013, started like any other day in the house on Seymour Avenue. Castro went about his normal routine, but he made a crucial mistake. He left the house without properly securing all the locks and alarms. Amanda Berry, now 27 years old and the mother of a 6-year-old daughter, noticed that the front door wasn't locked as securely as usual. After 10 years of captivity, she realized this might be her only chance. Amanda began working at the door, trying to create an opening large enough for her and Jocelyn to escape through. She managed to push the door open partially, but there was still a storm door blocking their way. This is when fate intervened in the form of Charles Ramsey, a neighbor who was sitting on his porch eating McDonald's. He heard Amanda screaming for help and came running. Ramsey would later become famous for his colorful television interviews, but in that moment, he was simply a good Samaritan who kicked in the storm door to help a desperate woman escape. Amanda burst out of the house with her daughter, ran to a neighbor's home, and called 911. The call was recorded and would later be played around the world. "Help me, I'm Amanda Berry," she told the dispatcher. "I've been kidnapped, and I've been missing for 10 years. And I'm here, I'm free now." The dispatcher asked her to confirm her name, perhaps not quite believing what she was hearing. "This is Amanda Berry," she repeated. "I've been on the news for the last 10 years. Within minutes, Cleveland police swarmed Seymour Avenue. Officers entered the house and found Gina De Jesus and Michelle Knight still inside, terrified and initially afraid to believe they were really being rescued. The 3 women were taken to Metra Health Medical Center, where they were examined and treated. Amanda's daughter Jocelyn, who had never been outside the house, was overwhelmed by the experience of seeing the real world for the first time. Ariel Castro was arrested just hours after the women's escape. He was at a McDonald's when police took him into custody, the same McDonald's chain where Charles Ramsey had been eating when he heard Amanda's cries for help. When investigators searched the house, they found a nightmare of makeshift prisons. Chains hanging from ceilings, boarded-up windows, reinforced doors with multiple locks. The house had been systematically modified to serve as a prison. Castro had kept detailed records of his crimes, including photographs and videos. The evidence was overwhelming and disturbing. Investigators also found the diaries that the women had been allowed to keep, which provided first-hand accounts of their experiences. The case shocked Cleveland and the nation. How had one man managed to hold 3 women captive for over a decade in the middle of a residential neighborhood? How had no one discovered what was happening? Castro was charged with kidnapping, rape, and aggravated murder, the murder charge relating to the intentional termination of pregnancies through assault. The evidence against him was so overwhelming that a trial seemed almost unnecessary. On July 26, 2013, Ariel Castro agreed to a plea deal to avoid the death penalty. In exchange for pleading guilty to 937 criminal counts, including aggravated murder, kidnapping, and rape, he would be sentenced to life in prison plus 1,000 years without the possibility of parole. At his sentencing hearing on August 1, 2013, Castro addressed the court. "I'm not a monster," he said. "I'm sick." He claimed to be a victim of sexual addiction and childhood abuse, attempting to explain but not excuse his actions. The 3 survivors also spoke at the sentencing. Michelle Knight, who had endured the longest captivity and the worst abuse, delivered a powerful victim impact statement. She told Castro, "You took 11 years of my life away, and I have got it back. I spent 11 years in hell, and now your hell is just beginning." Justice seemed to be served, but it would be short-lived. On September 3, 2013, less than a month after his sentencing, Ariel Castro was found hanging in his prison cell at the Correctional Reception Center in Orient, Ohio. He had committed suicide, denying his victims the satisfaction of knowing he would spend the rest of his life paying for his crimes. The 3 women faced the enormous challenge of rebuilding lives that had been stolen from them. Michelle Knight, who had suffered the most, legally changed her name to Lily Rose Lee and wrote a book about her experiences. She became an advocate for missing persons and victims of abuse. Amanda Berry reunited with her family and focused on raising her daughter, now free to experience the world for the first time. She co-authored a book with Gina De Jesus and returned to school to finish her education. Gina De Jesus also wrote about her experiences and became involved in organizations that help families of missing persons. She completed her education and worked to turn her traumatic experience into a force for helping others. The 3 women, who had sustained each other through the darkest period of their lives, remained close. They appeared together at public events and interviews, showing the world that survival was possible even after unimaginable trauma. The house at 2207 Seymour Avenue, where so much suffering had occurred, was eventually demolished. The lot was turned into a memorial garden called Gina's House, honoring all 3 survivors. The demolition was broadcast live on television, providing a symbolic end to a chapter that had terrorized Cleveland for over a decade. Neighbors who had lived next to the house for years struggled with guilt and questions. How had they not known? Could they have done something differently? The case highlighted how predators can hide in plain sight and how easy it can be for victims to disappear into situations where no one thinks to look for them. The Ariel Castro kidnappings revealed several troubling truths about missing persons cases and societal attitudes toward victims. Michelle Knight's disappearance was barely investigated because she fit a profile of someone who might voluntarily disappear, young, troubled, without strong family advocacy. This disparity in how missing persons cases are handled based on the victim's background became a point of discussion in law enforcement communities. The case also demonstrated the importance of community awareness and the willingness to act when something seems wrong. Charles Ramsey became a hero simply because he was willing to get involved when he heard someone calling for help. His actions remind us that ordinary people can make extraordinary differences. For families of missing persons, the case provided both hope and heartbreak. It showed that people can survive even the most horrific circumstances, that missing loved ones might still be alive even after many years. But it also highlighted the psychological and physical toll of such experiences. More than a decade after their escape, Amanda Berry, Gina De Jesus, and Michelle Knight have each found their own paths to healing and purpose. They've shown remarkable resilience, transforming their experiences into advocacy for others. Amanda has become a voice for missing persons, working with law enforcement and families to bring attention to cases that might otherwise be forgotten. She's raised her daughter, who has no memory of captivity and is now a typical teenager dealing with typical teenage concerns. Gina has used her experience to help other families navigate the complex world of missing persons investigations. She's spoken at conferences and worked with organizations dedicated to finding missing children and adults. Michelle, now Lily Rose Lee, has perhaps traveled the furthest in her healing journey. She's written multiple books, become a motivational speaker, and dedicated her life to helping others who have experienced trauma and abuse. The story of the Ariel Castro kidnappings is ultimately about human resilience, the capacity to endure unimaginable suffering and still find ways to heal and help others. It's about three young women who were stolen from their lives but refused to let that theft define their futures. It's about the importance of paying attention to our communities, of taking action when something seems wrong, and of never giving up hope for missing loved ones. It's about the complexity of justice and the long road to healing after trauma. Most importantly, it's about survival. Amanda Berry, Gina De Jesus, and Michelle Knight not only survived their ordeal but emerged from it with a determination to ensure that their suffering would serve a purpose. They've helped change how missing persons cases are investigated, brought attention to victims who might otherwise be forgotten, and shown the world that even in the darkest circumstances, the human spirit can endure. Their story continues to inspire and educate more than a decade after that dramatic rescue on May 6, 2013. It reminds us that behind every missing person poster is a human being deserving of attention, investigation, and hope. And it shows us that sometimes, against all odds, that hope is rewarded with the most precious gift of all, freedom. The house on Seymour Avenue is gone now, replaced by a garden where flowers grow. But the strength of the three women who survived there continues to bloom, touching lives and changing minds, ensuring that their story will never be forgotten and that other victims will never be abandoned to despair. In the end, evil may have hidden behind ordinary walls for more than a decade, but good triumphed. Not easily, not without tremendous cost, but definitively. And sometimes, in a world that can seem overwhelmingly dark, that's enough to help us sleep a little more peacefully. Please, if you're enjoying these stories, don't forget to leave a comment. Let me know where you're listening from and what time it is in your corner of the world. And if you haven't already, be sure to like this video and subscribe, so you don't miss the next true crime story for sleep. Now, let's move on to our third story. Story 3. On a warm Friday evening in May 2014, the college town of Isla Vista, California, was settling into another typical weekend. Students at UC Santa Barbara were winding down from finals, making plans for summer break, and enjoying the laid-back coastal atmosphere that made this community so special. But as darkness began to fall on May 23, one young man was putting the finishing touches on a plan that would shatter this peaceful college town forever. 22-year-old Elliot Rodger had been meticulously planning what he called his day of retribution for months. In his mind, the world owed him something: love, attention, the life he felt he deserved. And when that debt remained unpaid, he decided to collect it through violence. Elliot Oliver Robertson Rodger was born on July 24, 1991, in London, England. His father, Peter Rodger, was a British photographer who would later work as an assistant director on major Hollywood films, including The Hunger Games. His mother, Li Chin, was Malaysian Chinese. From the outside, Elliot's early years seemed privileged and promising. The family moved to the United States when Elliot was young, eventually settling in the affluent areas of Los Angeles County. They lived in places like Woodland Hills and later Calabasas, neighborhoods where luxury cars lined driveways and success was measured by zip codes and square footage. But beneath the surface of this seemingly perfect life, something was already going wrong. Even as a small child, Elliot struggled with social interactions. He was sensitive, easily overwhelmed, and had difficulty connecting with his peers. His parents divorced when he was 7, a traumatic event that would color much of his later worldview. As Elliot moved through his teenage years, his social difficulties became more pronounced. He attended several different schools, including the prestigious Crespi Carmelite High School, but nowhere could he find his place. He was intelligent, there was no question about that, but he seemed unable to translate that intelligence into social success. His manifesto, a 137-page document he titled, My Twisted World, provides a disturbing window into his psychological development. In it, he describes his growing obsession with what he perceived as his social failures, particularly his inability to attract romantic attention from girls. What's particularly chilling about Elliot's story is how ordinary his struggles initially seemed. Many teenagers deal with social anxiety, rejection, and feelings of inadequacy. But in Elliot's case, these normal adolescent challenges became twisted into something much darker. He began to develop an elaborate worldview in which he was the victim of a cosmic injustice. In his mind, he was handsome, intelligent, and wealthy, everything that should have made him attractive to women. The fact that he remained unsuccessful in dating wasn't, in his view, a reflection of his personality, his approach, or his unrealistic expectations. Instead, it was evidence that the world itself was fundamentally unfair. By the time Elliot reached college age, his mental state had deteriorated significantly. He enrolled at Santa Barbara City College, ostensibly to study, but really he seemed to be going through the motions of a normal life while nurturing increasingly violent fantasies. He moved into an apartment near UC Santa Barbara with several roommates, young men from other countries who were also students. But rather than seeing this as an opportunity to build friendships and connections, Elliot viewed his living situation through the lens of his growing resentment. He saw his roommates as obstacles to his fantasy of living alone, and their very presence in his space began to fuel his rage. His manifesto reveals that he had been fantasizing about violence for years. Initially, these fantasies were somewhat abstract. He imagined scenarios where he could somehow force the world to acknowledge his worth. But gradually, they became more specific and more actionable. Elliot began frequenting online forums where like-minded individuals shared their frustrations about rejection and dating. These communities, particularly one called PUA Hate, Pickup Artist Hate, provided validation for his increasingly misogynistic worldview. Here, he found others who blamed women for their romantic failures and who spoke of women as if they were prizes to be won rather than human beings with their own agency and preferences. The echo chamber effect of these online spaces cannot be overstated. Elliot's distorted thinking was not only accepted in these forums, it was encouraged and amplified. His growing hatred wasn't challenged, it was fed. As 2014 began, Elliot started making concrete preparations for what he had begun calling his Day of Retribution. He legally purchased 3 handguns, 2 Glock 34s and SIG Sauer P226. He researched the layout of the UC Santa Barbara campus and the surrounding area. Most disturbingly, he began to see his planned violence not as a crime, but as a form of cosmic justice. In the months leading up to the attack, there were several moments when intervention might have been possible. Elliot's behavior had become increasingly erratic and concerning to those around him. His parents, particularly his mother, had noticed changes in his demeanor and online presence. They had seen his YouTube videos, where he ranted about his frustrations with women and society. These videos, which he titled things like, "Why Do Girls Hate Me So Much?" and "My Reaction to Seeing a Young Couple," showed a young man who was clearly struggling with reality. In one particularly disturbing video posted just days before the attack, titled Elliot Rogers' Retribution, he laid out his plans in chilling detail. Sitting in his BMW, looking directly into the camera, he spoke with calm determination about his intention to punish the women who had rejected him and the men who had succeeded where he had failed. The most tragic near-miss came in April 2014, when Elliot's family became so concerned about his mental state and online posts that they contacted mental health professionals. This led to what's called a wellness check by the Santa Barbara County Sheriff's deputies. On April 30, 2014, deputies knocked on Elliot's door to assess his mental state. This was exactly the kind of intervention that might have prevented the tragedy that followed. But when the deputies spoke with Elliot, he appeared calm and rational. He assured them that he was fine, that he wasn't planning to hurt anyone, and that his online posts were just venting. The deputies, without access to his manifesto or full knowledge of his weapons purchases, determined that he didn't meet the criteria for involuntary commitment. They left, and the opportunity to stop what was coming passed. Later, in his manifesto, Elliot would write about this encounter with a chilling sense of having dodged a bullet. He knew that if the deputies had searched his room, they would have found his weapons and his detailed plans. The visit actually seemed to energize him, as if he had received confirmation that he could operate below the radar. As the sun set on May 23, 2014, Elliot Rodger began his carefully planned sequence of attacks. His plan was methodical and designed to maximize both casualties and symbolic impact. The violence began at his own apartment on Seville Road around 9:17 p.m. His first victims were his three roommates, Cheng Yuan Hong, 20, George Chin, 19, and Wei Han Wang, 19. All three were students, two from China and one from San Jose, California. The details of what happened in that apartment are disturbing. Elliot had apparently planned this opening phase carefully, waiting until he could attack his roommates when they were most vulnerable. He used knives and a hammer, brutally stabbing and bludgeoning the three young men to death. The scene investigators later discovered suggested a prolonged and vicious attack. This wasn't a moment of sudden rage, it was the methodical execution of the first phase of his plan. After killing his roommates, Elliot took time to clean himself up and prepare for the next phase. He loaded his weapons into his black BMW and began driving toward the UC Santa Barbara campus. Around 9:27 p.m., he arrived at the Alpha Phi sorority house on Embarcadero del Norte. This location wasn't chosen randomly. In Elliot's twisted worldview, sorority houses represented everything he hated about the social hierarchies that had rejected him. He pounded on the front door, apparently expecting to be let in so he could continue his killing spree inside. But the residents, sensing something was wrong with this agitated young man, didn't open the door. Frustrated, Elliot began shooting at people standing on the front lawn and nearby areas. 22-year-old Catherine Cooper and 19-year-old Veronica Weiss were killed in this attack. Both were UC Santa Barbara students who had simply been in the wrong place at the wrong time. A third woman was seriously wounded but survived. After the sorority shooting, Elliot got back into his BMW and continued his rampage. He drove to the Ford Deli Mart on Pardal Road, where he encountered 20-year-old Christopher Michaels Martinez, who was inside the store. Christopher was the son of a Hollywood attorney and had been featured in a documentary about gun violence just months earlier, ironically expressing his desire to live in a world free from gun violence. Now he became a victim of exactly the kind of senseless shooting he had spoken against. Elliot shot and killed Christopher inside the store, then continued his drive through Isla Vista, randomly shooting at people on the streets and sidewalks. Multiple people were wounded during this phase as he drove erratically through the college town, firing from his car window. The chaos was intensified by the confined geography of Isla Vista. This is a small, densely populated college town where students walk everywhere. On a Friday night, the streets were full of people, turning Elliot's drive into a gauntlet of potential victims. At approximately 9:33 p.m., Elliot's BMW crashed into a parked car near the intersection of Del Playa Drive and Camino Pescadero. Witnesses reported that he emerged from his vehicle and began shooting at people on foot before getting back into his car. Throughout this rampage, 911 calls were flooding into the Santa Barbara County Sheriff's Office. The reports were confusing and contradictory: multiple locations, multiple shooters possibly, chaos and panic spreading throughout the small community. Deputies were dispatched and began racing toward the sounds of gunfire. The entire active phase of Elliot's attack lasted only about 10 minutes, but in that short time, he had created a scene of absolute terror in what had been, moments before, a peaceful college town. The end came at approximately 9:34 p.m. when Elliot's BMW collided with several parked cars near Del Playa Drive. According to witnesses, he was still firing his weapon from inside the vehicle even as it came to its final stop. It was here, trapped in his damaged car, that Elliot Rodger turned one of his weapons on himself, ending his life and his rampage simultaneously. When deputies reached the crash site, they found Elliot dead in the driver's seat, surrounded by 3 handguns and hundreds of rounds of unused ammunition. The scope of what he had planned became clear: he had been prepared for a much longer and more deadly attack. In the immediate aftermath of the shootings, Isla Vista resembled a war zone. Emergency responders from multiple agencies flooded the small community. The UC Santa Barbara campus was placed on lockdown, and students huddled in their dorms and apartments, many live tweeting their terror as they tried to understand what was happening outside. The final toll was devastating: 6 innocent people dead, 14 others wounded, and a community traumatized. The victims ranged in age from 19 to 22, all young people with their entire lives ahead of them. As investigators began piecing together what had happened, the full scope of Elliott's planning became apparent. In addition to his manifesto, he had sent the document to his therapist, his parents, and several other people just before beginning his attack. The timing was deliberate. He wanted his motivations to be understood, but not until it was too late to stop him. The manifesto itself is a disturbing document that provides insight into the mind of someone who had completely lost touch with reality. In 137 pages, Elliott laid out his grievances against the world, his plans for revenge, and his justifications for mass murder. What's particularly chilling about the document is its tone. Elliott writes with the detached air of someone who believes he is being perfectly rational. He describes his planned murders not as crimes, but as justified responses to the perceived injustices he had suffered. The investigation also revealed the extent to which warning signs had been missed or misinterpreted. In addition to the wellness check by deputies, Elliott had been seeing therapists for years. Multiple professionals had interacted with him, but none had recognized the full extent of his dangerousness. This case highlighted significant gaps in the mental health system's ability to identify and intervene with individuals who pose a risk to themselves and others. Elliott had been in the system, receiving treatment, yet he was still able to legally purchase weapons and carry out his planned attack. The Isla Vista killing sent shockwaves far beyond the immediate community. The case became a focal point for discussions about gun control, mental health treatment, and the growing phenomenon of what experts call involuntary celibate or incel violence. Elliott's manifesto and online presence revealed his deep involvement in communities that promoted hatred toward women and a sense of entitlement to sexual and romantic attention. His attack was one of the first high-profile cases where this particular ideology was directly linked to mass violence. In the years since the attack, law enforcement and mental health professionals have had to grapple with this new category of threat. The incel movement, such as it is, represents a particularly dangerous intersection of misogyny, social isolation, and violent fantasy that can metastasize into real-world violence. The case also raised uncomfortable questions about privilege and entitlement. Elliott came from a wealthy family, had access to mental health treatment, and had material advantages that most people could only dream of. Yet he was able to convince himself that he was the victim of cosmic injustice because he couldn't get a date. For the families of the victims, the broader societal implications provided little comfort. Catherine Cooper's family, Veronica Weiss's family, Christopher Michaels Martinez's family, and the families of the 3 roommates who were killed, they all had to grapple with the senseless loss of their loved ones while the world debated policy implications. Christopher's father, Richard Martinez, became a powerful advocate for gun control in the aftermath of his son's death. In a heartbreaking press conference the day after the shooting, he looked directly into the cameras and said, "Why did Chris die? Chris died because of craven, irresponsible politicians and the NRA. They talk about gun rights. What about Chris's right to live?" His raw grief and anger captured the frustration that many felt, not just about this specific tragedy, but about the recurring pattern of mass shootings that seemed to define American life in the 21st century. Mental health experts who studied the case noted several factors that seemed to contribute to Elliott's violent trajectory. First was his apparent inability to develop empathy for others, particularly women. In his mind, women existed primarily as potential romantic partners, and when they failed to fulfill this role, they became objects of hatred. Second was his grandiose sense of self-importance, combined with a fragile ego that couldn't handle rejection or criticism. This created a psychological dynamic where any setback became evidence of external persecution rather than an opportunity for self-reflection. Third was his immersion in online communities that reinforced and amplified his distorted thinking. The internet provided Elliot with an echo chamber where his most toxic thoughts were validated and encouraged. Finally, there was his meticulous planning and fantasy life around violence. For years before the attack, Elliot had been mentally rehearsing scenarios of revenge and retribution. By the time he acted, he had thoroughly convinced himself that his victims deserved to die. What makes this case particularly unsettling is how rational Elliot appeared to outside observers. He wasn't obviously psychotic or delusional in his everyday interactions. He could present as a normal, if somewhat awkward, young man when he needed to. This highlights one of the most challenging aspects of preventing this type of violence. The signs that someone is planning mass murder aren't always obvious, even to trained professionals. The ability to compartmentalize and present a facade of normalcy while harboring violent intentions is more common than we might want to believe. The impact of the Isla Vista killings extended far beyond the immediate victims and their families. The entire UC Santa Barbara community was traumatized by the attack. Students who had felt safe in their college towns suddenly had to confront the reality that violence could erupt anywhere, at any time. Many students reported struggling with anxiety, depression, and post-traumatic stress in the months and years following the attack. The simple act of walking down the same streets where the shooting had occurred became a daily reminder of what they had lived through. The university itself had to grapple with how to memorialize the victims while also trying to help the community heal and move forward. Memorial services were held, scholarship funds were established, and counseling resources were expanded, but the fundamental sense of security that had been shattered couldn't be easily restored. For law enforcement, the case became a study in the challenges of preventing lone wolf attacks. Unlike terrorist organizations or criminal enterprises, individuals like Elliot Rodger operate largely in isolation, making them extremely difficult to detect and stop before they act. The Santa Barbara County Sheriff's Department conducted an extensive review of their response to the wellness check call in April 2014. While the deputies who responded followed proper protocols, the case raised questions about whether those protocols were adequate for assessing individuals who might be planning mass violence. One of the most disturbing aspects of the Elliot Rodger case was the extensive digital record he left behind. In addition to his manifesto, he had created numerous YouTube videos in which he expressed his grievances and hinted at his plans for revenge. These videos, some of which are still available online, provide a chilling real-time documentation of his mental deterioration. In early videos, he appears to be a typical, if somewhat awkward, young man complaining about his social difficulties. But as time progresses, his tone becomes darker and more threatening. The final video, posted just before his attack, is particularly disturbing. Sitting in his BMW, looking directly into the camera, Elliot calmly explains his intention to punish those who have wronged him. There's no obvious sign of mental illness or emotional distress, just a cold, calculated explanation of his plans for mass murder. This digital trail raised important questions about the responsibility of social media platforms to monitor and potentially intervene when users post concerning content. YouTube eventually removed most of Elliot's videos, but not before they had been viewed thousands of times and influenced others with similar grievances. The case also highlighted the role that online communities can play in radicalizing isolated individuals. Elliot's involvement in forums like PUA Hate provided him with a community that validated his most toxic beliefs and encouraged his sense of victimhood. In the decade since the Isla Vista killings, the case has continued to influence discussions about violence prevention, mental health treatment, and online radicalization. Several other attackers have explicitly cited Elliot Rodger as an inspiration, creating a disturbing legacy of copycat violence. This phenomenon of inspirational mass killers is particularly concerning to law enforcement and mental health professionals. When attackers become folk heroes to certain online communities, it increases the risk that others with similar grievances will follow their example. The incel movement, such as it is, has grown and evolved since 2014, often citing Elliot as a martyr figure. Online forums dedicated to these ideas continue to operate, providing spaces where violent fantasies are shared and encouraged. For parents, teachers, and mental health professionals, the case serves as a reminder of the importance of taking warning signs seriously. Social isolation, online radicalization, and expressions of grievance against specific groups can all be indicators of potential violence. But the case also illustrates the limits of intervention. Elliot had access to mental health treatment, his family was concerned and involved, and law enforcement even conducted a welfare check. Despite all of these potential intervention points, the tragedy still occurred. This underscores the complexity of preventing mass violence. There's no simple formula or checklist that can reliably identify who will become violent and who will not. Prevention requires a multifaceted approach that includes better mental health resources, more effective threat assessment protocols, and ongoing research into the psychology of mass violence. In all the analysis and discussion that has followed the Isla Vista killings, it's important not to lose sight of the human cost. 6 young people lost their lives that night, each with their own dreams, relationships, and potential contributions to the world. Catherine Cooper was a 22-year-old art history major from Chino Hills who was known for her kindness and creativity. Veronica Weiss was a 19-year-old freshman from Westlake Village who was just beginning her college journey. Christopher Michaels Martinez was a 20-year-old English major from Los Osos who had spoken passionately about his desire to make the world a better place. The 3 roommates, Cheng Yuan Hong, George Chen, and Wei Han Wang, were international students who had come to America to pursue their education and build better lives. They were killed in their own home by someone they had tried to live with peacefully. Each of these individuals represented a life cut short, a future that will never be realized. Their deaths remind us that behind every statistic about mass violence are real people with real families who continue to grieve their loss. The families and friends of these victims have shown remarkable resilience and grace in the face of unimaginable loss. Many have channeled their grief into advocacy for violence prevention, working to ensure that other families don't have to endure what they've experienced. The Elliot Rodger case offers several important lessons for society as we continue to grapple with the problem of mass violence. First, it highlights the importance of taking online threats and concerning behavior seriously, even when the person making them seems otherwise functional. Second, it underscores the need for better coordination between mental health professionals, law enforcement, and families when someone appears to be at risk of violence. The current system often fails to adequately assess and respond to individuals who may be planning attacks. Third, it demonstrates the dangerous potential of online communities that promote hatred and violence. The internet can be a powerful force for connection and support, but it can also serve as an echo chamber that amplifies toxic ideologies and encourages violent action. Finally, the case reminds us that mass violence is a complex phenomenon that can't be attributed to any single cause. Mental illness, access to weapons, social isolation, online radicalization, and personal grievances can all play a role, but none by themselves fully explain why someone chooses to commit mass murder. As we continue to search for solutions to the problem of mass violence, the Isla Vista killings serve as both a tragedy to be mourned and a case study to be learned from. The 6 people who died that night deserve to be remembered not just as victims, but as individuals whose lives had meaning and whose deaths demand that we do better as a society. The quiet college town of Isla Vista has largely healed in the years since the attack, but the scars remain. Students still walk the same streets, attend the same university, and build the same kinds of friendships and relationships that have always defined college life. But they do so with the knowledge that peace and safety are more fragile than we might wish to believe. In the end, perhaps the most fitting memorial to the victims of the Isla Vista killings is our continued commitment to understanding and preventing such tragedies. Their deaths were senseless and avoidable, but if we can learn from what happened and work to build a safer, more compassionate society, then perhaps some meaning can be found in the midst of such profound loss. The story of Elliot Rodger is ultimately a story about the dangerous intersection of entitlement, isolation, and violence. It's a reminder that behind every act of mass violence is a complex web of factors that, in the right circumstances, can combine with devastating effect. Our challenge as a society is to identify and interrupt these patterns before they lead to tragedy. As you drift off to sleep tonight, remember that for most of us, the world is a fundamentally safe place. The tragedy in Isla Vista was an aberration, not the norm. But it's also a reminder that the safety we often take for granted is maintained by the vigilance and care of countless individuals, from law enforcement officers to mental health professionals to ordinary citizens who look out for one another. The victims of that terrible night in May 2014 are gone, but they are not forgotten. Their stories live on as both a tragedy to be mourned and a call to action for all of us to build a better, safer world for future generations. Please, I'm just putting it out there, if you're still awake and listening, drop a comment. Let me know where you're tuning in from, the time in your part of the world, or just say something to let me know you're still with me. And of course, if you haven't already, like this video and subscribe so you don't miss the next true crime story for sleep. Now, let's move on to our fourth story. Story 4. Tonight, we're traveling to the southeastern region of Turkey, to a small village where a family's darkest secrets would ultimately lead to an unthinkable tragedy. This is the story of 8-year-old Naren Güran, a case that shocked an entire nation and revealed the devastating consequences of forbidden love, family betrayal, and deadly silence. Our story begins in the late summer of 2024, in the quiet village of Tavşantepe, located in the Baglar district of Diyarbakır province. This is a region where tradition runs deep, where families live closely connected to one another, and where secrets, when they exist, are carefully guarded behind closed doors. It was here that young Naren Güran lived with her family, a bright 8-year-old girl who attended Quran lessons and helped around the house, living what appeared to be a simple, peaceful childhood. August 21, 2024, started like any other day in the Güran household. The morning sun cast long shadows across the dusty village streets as Naren prepared to attend her regular Quran lessons. These religious studies were an important part of her routine, and like many children in conservative Turkish villages, she took them seriously. Her mother, Yüksel Güran, watched as her daughter gathered her things and set off for what would become her final lesson. The day passed quietly in the village. Neighbors went about their daily routines, unaware that tragedy was already beginning to unfold within the walls of the Güran family home. When evening approached and Naren failed to return from her lessons, initial concern began to ripple through the family. In small villages like Tavşantepe, everyone knows everyone else's business, and children don't simply disappear without explanation. As the hours stretched into the night of August 21st, worry transformed into panic. Naren's father, along with other family members, began searching the immediate area around their home. They called out her name through the darkened streets, their voices echoing off the stone walls of neighboring houses. Local authorities were notified, and what began as a family's private concern quickly became a community-wide search effort. The initial investigation seemed straightforward enough. An 8-year-old child had gone missing somewhere between her Quran lessons and her home. Police interviewed her teacher, who confirmed that Naren had attended the lesson that day and had left at the usual time. They spoke with neighbors along the route she would have taken home, but no one reported seeing anything unusual or concerning. As the first 48 hours passed without any trace of Naren, the search expanded beyond the immediate village. Professional search and rescue teams were brought in, along with trained dogs and specialized equipment. The rocky terrain around Tavşantepe presented numerous challenges: caves, ravines, and dense vegetation that could easily conceal a small child, whether hiding in fear or worse. Days turned into a week, and still, there was no sign of Naren Güran. The case began attracting national attention across Turkey. News crews descended upon the small village, transforming the quiet community into a media circus. Reporters interviewed family members, neighbors, and local officials, all searching for any clue that might lead to the missing child. During these early days of the investigation, Naren's family appeared to cooperate fully with authorities. Her mother, Yuxel, made tearful pleas on television, begging for her daughter's safe return. Her father spoke with investigators repeatedly, providing timeline information and answering questions about Naren's habits and the family's routine. Her older brother, Enes, also participated in the search efforts, appearing genuinely concerned for his little sister's well-being. Among those most actively involved in the search was Naren's uncle, Selim Güran. A man in his 30s, Selim lived in the same village and was considered a close family member. He organized search parties, distributed flyers with Naren's photograph, and seemed deeply affected by his niece's disappearance. To outside observers, he appeared to be a devoted uncle doing everything possible to bring his young relative home safely. As the investigation continued, police began employing more sophisticated techniques. Cell phone records were analyzed, looking for any unusual patterns of communication on the day of Naren's disappearance. Security cameras from businesses in the area were reviewed, though the rural setting meant such footage was limited. Every lead, no matter how small, was pursued with determination. The community rallied around the search effort. Volunteers from neighboring villages joined the daily searches, combing through fields, checking abandoned buildings, and exploring every possible hiding place within a widening radius of Tavsantip. Local mosques organized prayer sessions for Naren's safe return, and her photograph appeared on social media platforms across Turkey, shared by thousands of concerned citizens. 2 weeks into the search, investigators began focusing more intensively on the family's inner circle. This shift came partly from the lack of any credible sightings or evidence of an outside abduction, and partly from certain inconsistencies that had begun to emerge in various family members' statements. Police started conducting more detailed interviews with each relative, carefully comparing their accounts of August 21st and the days following. It was during this phase of the investigation that authorities first began to look more closely at Selim Güran's activities and whereabouts. While he had been actively participating in the search efforts, investigators noticed certain discrepancies in his timeline for the day of Naren's disappearance. More concerning was the discovery that his cell phone had been in areas that didn't align with his stated activities on August 21st. On September 2nd, nearly 2 weeks after Naren's disappearance, police made their first arrest in the case. Selim Güran was taken into custody on suspicion of premeditated murder and deprivation of liberty. The arrest sent shockwaves through both the family and the broader community. Here was a man who had been leading search efforts, who had appeared on television pleading for his niece's return, now accused of being responsible for her disappearance. The evidence that led to Selim's arrest was compelling. Forensic analysis of his vehicle had revealed traces of Naren's DNA, specifically in the trunk area. This physical evidence directly contradicted his claims of having no knowledge of what had happened to his niece. When confronted with this evidence during interrogation, Selim's story began to change, though he maintained his innocence regarding any harm coming to Naren. Following Selim's arrest, investigators also detained his associate, Nevzat Bahtiyar. Bahtiyar was a local man who had been helping with various aspects of the search effort and was known to be a friend of Selim's. Initially, his connection to the case wasn't clear, but as the investigation deepened, his role would prove to be crucial to understanding what had actually happened to Naren Güran. Under intense questioning, Nevzat Bahtiyar became the first person to provide a partial confession in the case. On September 9, he admitted to investigators that he had helped dispose of Naren's body. According to his statement, Selim Güran had approached him with something wrapped in a blanket, asking him to get rid of this. Bahtiyar claimed that he had not initially known what was in the bundle, but had agreed to help his friend dispose of it in a local stream. This confession provided investigators with the breakthrough they had been desperately seeking. Bahtiyar led authorities to the Eger Tutmaz stream, located approximately 2 kilometers from the Güran family home. It was here, on September 8, exactly 19 days after Naren had disappeared, that search teams finally found her body, concealed in a sack and hidden among the vegetation along the stream bank. The discovery of Nairn's remains brought the extensive search operation to a tragic conclusion, but it also opened up an entirely new phase of the criminal investigation. Now, instead of a missing child case, authorities were dealing with a homicide, and the evidence was pointing directly toward members of Nairn's own family. The autopsy results, conducted by the Istanbul Forensic Medicine Institute, revealed disturbing details about Nairn's final moments. The 8-year-old had died from asphyxiation. She had been strangled. The forensic examination confirmed that she had been killed on August 21st, the very day she had disappeared, ruling out any possibility that she had been held captive for any period of time. There were no signs of sexual assault, and no evidence of poisoning or other methods of murder. As investigators pieced together the timeline of events, a horrifying picture began to emerge. According to the evidence and witness statements, Nairn had returned home from her Quran lessons on the afternoon of August 21st, just as she had countless times before. But instead of the safety and security she expected to find in her family home, she encountered a situation that would cost her life. The motive for Nairn's murder, as it was eventually revealed through the investigation, was both shocking and tragic. According to statements made during the trial, the 8-year-old had apparently witnessed an illicit affair between her mother, Yüksel Güran, and her uncle, Selim Güran. In the conservative community where they lived, such a relationship would be considered not just scandalous, but potentially devastating to the family's reputation and standing in the village. The prosecution's case, as it developed, suggested that Nairn had discovered this forbidden relationship, and that the adults involved feared she might reveal what she had seen. In their desperation to keep the secret hidden, they made the unthinkable decision to silence the child permanently. The murder was not a crime of passion, but a calculated decision to eliminate a witness who could destroy their carefully maintained facade. Following the discovery of Nairn's body and the initial confessions, the investigation expanded to include other family members. On September 17, authorities arrested 3 additional relatives: Nairn's mother, Yüksel Güran, her older brother, Enes Güran, and another uncle. These arrests indicated that investigators believed the murder was not the act of a single individual, but rather a conspiracy involving multiple family members. The phone records that investigators had been analyzing throughout the case proved to be particularly revealing. Cell tower data showed significant communication activity among the Güran family members on 3 critical dates: August 21st, the day of the murder, September 2nd, when Selim was arrested, and September 8th, when Nairn's body was discovered. The pattern of calls suggested coordination and planning among the family members, supporting the theory of a broader conspiracy. As the case moved toward trial, prosecutors prepared charges against 4 defendants: Yüksel Güran, Nairn's mother, Enes Güran, her brother, Selim Güran, her uncle, and Nevzat Bahtiyar, Selim's associate who had helped dispose of the body. The charges were serious. Aggravated life imprisonment was being sought for 3 of the defendants, while Bahtiyar faced a somewhat lesser sentence due to his cooperation with the investigation. The trial began in November 2024, held at the 8th High Criminal Court in Diyarbakir. The proceedings were conducted under heavy security, with the defendants transported from prison in armored vehicles. The case had generated enormous public interest throughout Turkey, with many citizens following the developments through news coverage and social media. During the first hearing, some of the most shocking revelations of the case came to light. Nevzat Bahtiyar, who had already confessed to helping dispose of Nairn's body, provided more detailed testimony about what he claimed to have witnessed. According to his court statement, when he arrived at the Güran family home on August 21st, he found Nairn lying unconscious in a room. He alleged that Selim Güran had told him that the child had discovered the affair between him and Yüksel, and that they couldn't risk her revealing this information. The courtroom testimony painted a picture of a family torn apart by secrets and betrayal. According to the prosecution's case, the adults in Nairn's life, the very people who should have protected her, had instead conspired to end her life to protect their own reputations and relationships. The 8-year-old had become an obstacle to be eliminated, rather than a child to be cherished and safeguarded. Throughout the trial proceedings, the defendants maintained varying degrees of denial regarding their involvement in the murder. However, the physical evidence, including the DNA found in Salim's vehicle, the cell phone records showing coordinated communication, and the testimony of witnesses who had observed suspicious behavior, painted a damning picture of guilt. The case also highlighted broader social issues within Turkish society, particularly regarding the treatment of women and children in conservative communities where honor and reputation are considered paramount. Many observers noted that Naren had essentially been sacrificed to preserve what the adults perceived as their social standing, reflecting deeply troubling priorities within certain segments of society. As the trial progressed through multiple hearings, the evidence continued to mount against the defendants. Forensic experts testified about the DNA evidence, telecommunications specialists explained the significance of the phone records, and witnesses provided testimony about the family's behavior both before and after Naren's disappearance. The prosecution's case was methodical and comprehensive. They argued that the murder had been premeditated, planned by multiple family members who were more concerned with hiding their secrets than protecting an innocent child. They presented evidence of the affair that had allegedly motivated the killing, the coordination among family members to carry out the murder and dispose of the body, and the elaborate deception that followed as the family participated in search efforts while knowing exactly what had happened to Naren. On December 28, 2024, after months of proceedings and deliberation, the court reached its verdict. 3 of the defendants, Yüksel Güran, Enes Güran, and Salim Güran, were sentenced to aggravated life imprisonment for their roles in Naren's murder. Nevzat Bahtiyar, who had cooperated with the investigation and helped lead authorities to the body, received a sentence of 4 years and 6 months in prison. The sentencing brought a measure of legal closure to a case that had captivated and horrified Turkey for months. However, for many observers, no amount of punishment could truly address the fundamental tragedy of what had occurred. An 8-year-old child had been murdered by her own family members, people who should have loved and protected her above all else. The Naren Güran case became more than just a criminal matter, it evolved into a symbol of broader societal problems. Child advocacy groups used the case to highlight the vulnerability of children in situations where family secrets and adult interests take precedence over child welfare. The case sparked discussions about the need for better protection mechanisms for children and stronger enforcement of laws designed to safeguard young people. In the aftermath of the trial, the village of Tavşantepe struggled to return to normalcy. The case had brought unwanted national attention to the small community, and the knowledge that such a horrific crime had been committed by a local family left lasting scars. The house where Naren had lived stood as a somber reminder of the tragedy, while the stream where her body had been discovered became an unofficial memorial site where people left flowers and messages. The investigation had revealed the existence of what prosecutors called a murder without a killer, a crime where multiple people were involved, but where the exact moment and method of Naren's death remained somewhat unclear despite the convictions. The complexity of the family relationships, the multiple participants in the cover-up, and the various levels of knowledge and involvement among different family members created a web of culpability that was difficult to fully untangle. For investigators, the case represented both a success and a tragedy. They had successfully identified the perpetrators, gathered the evidence necessary for conviction, and brought the responsible parties to justice. However, they had been unable to save Naren Güran, and the knowledge that her death had been entirely preventable, the result of adult choices and priorities, weighed heavily on everyone involved in the investigation. The forensic evidence in the case had been crucial to securing convictions. The DNA found in Salim's vehicle provided irrefutable proof of his involvement, while the pattern of cell phone communications demonstrated coordination among the family members. The testimony of Nevzat Bahtiyar, despite his own involvement in the crime, had been essential in understanding how the murder and cover-up had been carried out. Media coverage of the case had been extensive throughout Turkey, with newspapers, television stations, and online platforms following every development. The story resonated with the public partly because of Naren's young age and innocent appearance, but also because it challenged assumptions about family loyalty and protection. The idea that parents and relatives could conspire to murder a child for such reasons was deeply disturbing to most people. International media also picked up the story, particularly focusing on the cultural and social aspects of the case. The murder highlighted issues related to honor, reputation, and the treatment of women and children in conservative societies. Many commentators noted that while the specific circumstances of Nairn's case were extreme, the underlying attitudes that had led to her death were not uncommon in certain communities. Child psychology experts who followed the case noted the particular tragedy of Nairn's situation. She had been punished for simply observing adult behavior that she likely didn't fully understand. An 8-year-old child had become a victim not just of violence, but of adult secrets and priorities that placed reputation above the safety and welfare of the most vulnerable family member. The legal proceedings had also revealed the challenges involved in prosecuting cases where multiple family members are implicated in a crime. Establishing individual levels of responsibility, determining who played what role in the planning and execution of the murder, and understanding the family dynamics that had made such a crime possible required extensive investigation and careful analysis of evidence. Following the convictions, appeals were expected from the defendants' legal teams. However, the strength of the physical evidence, combined with the testimony and communications records, suggested that the verdicts were likely to be upheld. The sentences of aggravated life imprisonment meant that the 3 main perpetrators would spend the rest of their lives in prison for their roles in Nairn's death. The case also prompted discussions about prevention and early intervention in family situations where children might be at risk. Social workers, educators, and child advocates emphasized the importance of recognizing warning signs and creating systems that could protect children from harm within their own families, traditionally considered the safest environment for young people. As we conclude this tragic story, we're left to contemplate the devastating consequences of adult choices on innocent lives. Nairn Guerin was just 8 years old when her life was cut short, not by a stranger or random act of violence, but by the very people who should have protected her. Her case serves as a stark reminder of the vulnerability of children and the absolute responsibility that adults have to prioritize their safety and well-being above all other considerations. The investigation into Nairn's murder revealed a web of family secrets, forbidden relationships, and misguided priorities that ultimately led to an unthinkable crime. While justice was served through the legal system, no verdict could restore a young life or heal the trauma inflicted on a community that had come together to search for a child who had already been lost to the people who claimed to love her. Tonight, as we remember Nairn Guerin, we're reminded of the importance of protecting the most vulnerable members of our society. Her story, while tragic, serves as a call to action for all of us to remain vigilant, to speak up when children are at risk, and to never allow adult interests to supersede the fundamental right of every child to safety, security, and life itself. Please, if you're still awake, let's move on to our last story. Story 5. In the quiet halls of a hospital, where the miracle of life unfolds every day, the most unthinkable betrayal was taking place. Between March and June of 2022, in the city of Córdoba, Argentina, 13 innocent newborn babies became victims of someone they should have been able to trust completely. 5 of them would never make it home to their families. Tonight, we delve into the disturbing case of Brenda Cecilia Aguero, a 29-year-old nurse whose actions would earn her the chilling moniker, Angel of Death. This is a story about trust betrayed, about the darkest corners of human nature, and about a system that failed to protect its most vulnerable patients. The Ramon Castillo Neonatal Hospital in Córdoba, Argentina, was supposed to be a place of hope and new beginnings. Specializing in the care of newborn babies, particularly those born prematurely or with complications, it was where anxious parents brought their most precious gifts into the world, trusting that skilled medical professionals would keep them safe. The hospital's neonatal intensive care unit was a world unto itself, a sterile, controlled environment where every beep of a monitor, every adjustment to a breathing tube, every medication administered could mean the difference between life and death for the tiniest patients. It was here, in this sanctuary of healing, that Brenda Aguero worked as a registered nurse. To her colleagues and the families she served, Brenda appeared to be everything you would want in a neonatal nurse. She was young, seemingly dedicated to her profession, and had been entrusted with the care of the hospital's most vulnerable patients. The parents who watched their premature babies fighting for life in tiny incubators had no reason to suspect that the woman in scrubs, moving quietly through the unit with medical authority, posed any threat to their children. March 18, 2022, began like any other day in the neonatal unit. The rhythm of the hospital continued its familiar pattern: shift changes, medication rounds, feeding times, and the constant vigilance required to keep premature infants stable. But on this day, something would happen that would eventually unravel a web of deliberate harm that had been building in the shadows. A baby, born healthy and showing all the signs of thriving despite being premature, suddenly went into severe distress. The infant's vital signs plummeted without warning. The baby experienced what medical professionals call cardiorespiratory distress. Essentially, the heart and lungs began to fail simultaneously. The medical team rushed to intervene, working frantically to stabilize the child, but despite their best efforts, the baby could not be saved. In a neonatal intensive care unit, sadly, infant mortality is not unheard of. Premature babies face numerous challenges, and sometimes, despite the best medical care available, they don't survive. The medical staff at Ramon Castillo Hospital initially viewed this death as a tragic but not entirely unexpected outcome in their line of work. But this was only the beginning. Over the following weeks, more incidents began to occur. Another baby, previously stable, would suddenly experience a dramatic decline in health. Then another. What started as isolated incidents began to form a disturbing pattern that would eventually catch the attention of hospital administrators and, ultimately, law enforcement. Between March 18 and June 6, 2022, the neonatal unit at Ramon Castillo Hospital experienced an unprecedented crisis. 13 babies, newborns who had been born successfully and were in various stages of recovery, suddenly began experiencing severe medical complications that seemed to come out of nowhere. The incidents followed a similar pattern that would later prove crucial to investigators. A baby who had been stable, perhaps even improving, would suddenly go into distress. Their tiny bodies would experience what doctors call decompensation, a rapid deterioration in their medical condition. Heart rates would spike or plummet, breathing would become labored or stop altogether, and despite immediate medical intervention, 5 of these children would ultimately lose their lives. Hospital administrators initially suspected a hospital-acquired infection. In neonatal units, infections can spread quickly and prove devastating to babies whose immune systems are not yet fully developed. The hospital launched an internal investigation, looking at sterilization procedures, checking for contaminated equipment or medications, and reviewing all protocols for handling premature infants. But the infection hypothesis didn't hold up under scrutiny. The babies weren't showing typical signs of bacterial or viral infections. Their blood work didn't indicate the presence of the usual pathogens that cause hospital-acquired infections. The medical team was puzzled and increasingly concerned. As the investigation deepened, another theory emerged: medical malpractice. Perhaps there had been errors in medication dosages, problems with equipment, or other forms of negligence that were causing these tragic outcomes. This line of inquiry led to extensive reviews of medical records, interviews with staff members, and examinations of all medical equipment and procedures. But this theory, too, failed to explain the pattern of incidents. The medical care being provided met all standards, the equipment was functioning properly, and the staff was following established protocols. Something else was happening, something more sinister than anyone wanted to consider. By mid-2022, the unusual cluster of infant deaths and near-deaths at the Ramon Castillo Hospital had attracted the attention of authorities beyond the hospital's walls. The provincial government launched an official investigation, bringing in external medical experts and eventually involving law enforcement. The investigation took a crucial turn when forensic pathologists began conducting detailed autopsies on the babies who had died. What they found was shocking and would change the entire direction of the case. The autopsies revealed something that natural deaths, infections, or medical mistakes couldn't explain. The babies had extremely high levels of potassium in their systems. In some cases, insulin levels were also abnormally elevated. These weren't trace amounts or levels that might occur naturally, they were massive, lethal concentrations that could only have been introduced artificially. Potassium, while naturally present in the human body, becomes extremely dangerous in high concentrations. When injected in large amounts, it can cause immediate cardiac arrest. Similarly, insulin in excessive doses can cause fatal drops in blood sugar, leading to brain damage and death. Both substances, when administered in lethal doses, can kill quickly and, to the untrained eye, might appear to be natural cardiac events. The discovery of these artificial levels of potassium and insulin transformed what had been an investigation into possible negligence or infection into a criminal investigation into multiple homicides. Someone had been deliberately injecting these babies with lethal substances. Someone with access to the neonatal unit, knowledge of how to administer injections, and the trust of the hospital system had been systematically murdering newborn children. With the investigation now focused on deliberate poisoning, investigators began looking more closely at who had access to the babies during the times when the incidents occurred. They reviewed security footage, examined work schedules, and conducted detailed interviews with all hospital staff. A pattern began to emerge that would prove damning. In nearly every case where a baby had been poisoned or had died, one person had been present, Brenda Aguero. The 29-year-old nurse had been working in the neonatal unit during the entire period when the incidents occurred. More specifically, investigators found that she had been directly involved in the care of all 13 babies who had been victimized. She had had access to the medications used to poison them, the medical knowledge to know how much would be lethal, and the opportunity to administer the injections without immediate detection. As investigators dug deeper into Brenda's background and behavior during this period, more troubling details emerged. Colleagues began to recall instances where Brenda had been unusually calm during medical emergencies, times when she had been the first to discover a baby in distress, and occasions where she had seemed almost detached from the tragedy unfolding around her. The investigation also revealed that Brenda had a concerning pattern of being present during medical crises. While this might initially seem like dedication to her job, investigators realized it was actually evidence of her involvement in creating these emergencies. On August 31, 2022, Brenda Cecilia Aguero was arrested at her home in Córdoba. The charges against her were staggering in their scope and severity: 5 counts of aggravated murder and 8 counts of attempted murder. The arrest sent shockwaves through the medical community in Argentina and beyond. The idea that a nurse, someone entrusted with the care and protection of the most vulnerable patients, could systematically murder the babies in her care was almost incomprehensible. But the case against Brenda was strong. The forensic evidence was clear: the babies had been poisoned. The circumstantial evidence was compelling: she had been present for every incident and had access to the substances used. And investigators had built a timeline that showed a clear pattern of her involvement in each case. The hospital also faced scrutiny. How had these incidents gone unnoticed for so long? Why hadn't anyone suspected that the cluster of deaths and near-deaths might be the result of deliberate action rather than natural causes or medical mistakes? Hospital director Liliana Assis would later be charged with concealment for failing to properly report the suspicious deaths to authorities. The case revealed serious failures in the hospital's oversight and reporting procedures that had allowed Brenda to continue her deadly actions for months. The trial of Brenda Aguero began in early 2025 and would continue for 6 months. It was one of the most closely watched criminal proceedings in Argentina in recent years, drawing international attention and comparisons to similar cases around the world, including that of British nurse Lucy Letby, who had been convicted of similar crimes against infants in her care. The prosecution's case was methodical and devastating. They presented the forensic evidence showing the artificial levels of potassium and insulin in the victims' bodies. They demonstrated through hospital records and security footage that Brenda had been present during each incident. They brought in medical experts who testified that the levels of these substances found in the babies could only have been introduced deliberately and would have caused rapid death or severe medical distress. Perhaps most compelling were the testimony of medical professionals who had worked alongside Brenda during this period. Several colleagues testified that they had noticed unusual patterns in her behavior, though none had suspected the truth at the time. Some described her as seeming unusually calm during medical emergencies, while others noted that she often seemed to be the first person to discover a baby in distress. The prosecution argued that Brenda had used her position of trust and her medical knowledge to systematically poison the babies in her care. They contended that she had injected lethal doses of potassium and insulin into the intravenous lines of these vulnerable infants, causing cardiac arrest and other life-threatening complications. Brenda's defense team faced an uphill battle. The forensic evidence was clear, the circumstantial evidence was overwhelming, and the prosecution had built a compelling timeline of events. The defense primarily focused on challenging the interpretation of the medical evidence and questioning whether there might be other explanations for the high levels of potassium and insulin found in the baby's systems. However, the medical testimony was unambiguous. Multiple experts confirmed that the levels of these substances found in the victims were far beyond what could occur naturally or through medical error. The only explanation was deliberate administration of lethal doses. After 6 months of testimony and 10 hours of deliberation, the jury reached their verdict. On June 18, 2025, Brenda Cecilia Aguero was found guilty on all counts, 5 counts of aggravated murder and 8 counts of attempted murder. The judge sentenced her to life imprisonment without the possibility of parole for 35 years. At 29 years old, Brenda would spend the rest of her life in prison for her crimes against the most innocent and vulnerable members of society. The conviction of Brenda Aguero brought some measure of justice for the families whose babies had been murdered or harmed, but it also raised troubling questions about how such crimes could occur in a modern medical facility. Hospital director Liliana Assis was sentenced to 5 years in prison for concealing the deaths from authorities and failing to report the suspicious pattern of infant mortality. Her conviction highlighted the institutional failures that had allowed Brenda to continue her deadly actions for months without detection. The case prompted widespread reforms in Argentine hospitals, particularly in neonatal units. New protocols were established for monitoring and reporting unusual patterns of patient outcomes. Additional oversight was implemented for medication administration, and enhanced background checks were instituted for medical personnel working with vulnerable populations. But perhaps the most haunting aspect of the case is the question of motive. Throughout her trial, Brenda never provided a clear explanation for her actions. Unlike some similar cases where perpetrators have claimed mercy killings or expressed delusional beliefs about helping their victims, Brenda's motivations remain largely mysterious. Some experts have suggested that she may have suffered from what's known as Munchausen syndrome by proxy, a psychological disorder where someone deliberately causes harm to others in their care in order to receive attention or praise for their response to the crisis. Others have pointed to the psychological profile of healthcare serial killers, who often derive a sense of power and control from their ability to decide who lives and who dies. The case of Brenda Aguero is unfortunately not unique in the annals of criminal history. Healthcare serial killers, though rare, represent one of the most disturbing categories of violent crime. The very nature of the medical profession, the trust placed in healthcare workers, their access to vulnerable patients, and their knowledge of how to cause harm without immediate detection, creates opportunities for those with malevolent intentions. Cases like those of Harold Shipman in the UK, Charles Cullen in the United States, and now Brenda Aguero in Argentina share common characteristics. The perpetrators typically work in positions that give them access to vulnerable patients. They use their medical knowledge to cause harm in ways that might initially appear natural, and they often continue their crimes for extended periods before being detected. These cases also highlight the challenges that healthcare institutions face in detecting such crimes. Medical professionals are trained to save lives, not to suspect their colleagues of murder. Patients in hospitals, particularly vulnerable populations like premature infants, face numerous health risks that can result in death or serious complications. Distinguishing between natural medical outcomes and deliberate harm can be extremely difficult, especially when the perpetrator has medical training and knows how to make murders appear natural. In focusing on the crimes and the criminal, it's important to remember that at the center of this case were 13 innocent babies and their families. 5 families lost their children, babies who should have grown up, taken their first steps, spoken their first words, and lived full lives. 8 other families nearly lost their children and will forever live with the trauma of knowing that someone deliberately tried to harm their babies. The psychological impact on these families cannot be overstated. Beyond the grief of losing a child or the trauma of nearly losing one, these parents must grapple with the betrayal of trust that Brenda's crimes represent. They brought their babies to the hospital for care and protection, only to have them become victims of the very person entrusted with their well-being. The surviving children and their families will also have to live with the long-term consequences of Brenda's actions. Some of the babies who were poisoned but survived may face ongoing health challenges as a result of the trauma their tiny bodies endured. The families will carry the psychological scars of this experience for the rest of their lives. The Brenda Aguero case has led to significant changes in how Argentine hospitals monitor and report patient outcomes, particularly in neonatal units. The tragedy highlighted several critical gaps in the healthcare system that allowed these crimes to continue undetected for months. New protocols require more detailed reporting of unexpected patient deaths or deteriorations, particularly when they occur in clusters or follow unusual patterns. Hospitals now have enhanced oversight systems for medication administration, with multiple verification steps required before dangerous substances like potassium can be administered to patients. The case has also led to improved training for healthcare administrators and medical staff on recognizing potential signs of healthcare-associated crimes. While medical professionals should not be constantly suspicious of their colleagues, they are now better equipped to identify concerning patterns that might indicate deliberate harm. Background check procedures for healthcare workers have been strengthened, particularly for those working with vulnerable populations. While Brenda's background apparently showed no prior criminal behavior, the case has highlighted the importance of ongoing monitoring and assessment of healthcare workers' behavior and psychological state. Brenda Aguero's case gained international attention, particularly because it occurred around the same time as similar cases in other countries. The conviction of British nurse Lucy Letby for murdering infants in her care drew comparisons to Brenda's crimes, highlighting the global nature of this type of healthcare-associated violence. These cases have prompted international discussions about how to prevent healthcare serial killings, how to detect them more quickly when they do occur, and how to support the victims and families affected by such crimes. Medical institutions worldwide have begun implementing enhanced monitoring systems and protocols designed to identify concerning patterns in patient outcomes more rapidly. The international attention has also brought greater awareness to the psychological profiles of healthcare serial killers and the institutional factors that can enable their crimes. This knowledge is being used to develop better prevention strategies and early detection systems. Even after her conviction and sentencing, the Brenda Aguero case continues to evolve through the legal system. Her defense team has filed appeals challenging various aspects of the trial and verdict, arguing that the ruling lacked proper legal grounds and was based on arbitrary assessments of the evidence. These appeals are currently being reviewed by higher courts in Argentina. While appeals are a normal part of the legal process, they also mean that the case remains open and that the families of the victims must continue to relive their trauma through ongoing legal proceedings. The appeals process also raises questions about the strength of the evidence and the thoroughness of the investigation. However, the overwhelming medical evidence and the clear pattern of Brenda's presence during each incident make it unlikely that her conviction will be overturned. One of the most disturbing aspects of the Brenda Aguero case is the apparent lack of a clear motive for her crimes. Unlike some healthcare serial killers who claim to be mercy-killing, suffering patients or who express delusional beliefs about their actions, Brenda has provided no coherent explanation for why she systematically poisoned newborn babies. Criminal psychologists who have studied the case suggest several possible psychological factors that might have driven her actions. Some point to the psychological profile common among healthcare serial killers, individuals who derive a sense of power and control from their ability to decide who lives and who dies. The godlike power over life and death can become addictive for certain personality types. Others suggest that Brenda may have suffered from Munchausen syndrome by proxy, a condition where someone deliberately harms others in their care to receive attention or praise for their response to the crisis. In a hospital setting, this might manifest as a healthcare worker who creates medical emergencies and then appears heroic in responding to them. There's also the possibility that Brenda was motivated by more basic psychological needs, attention, recognition, or simply the thrill of successfully deceiving her colleagues and the medical system. The fact that she continued her crimes for months suggests that she derived some form of satisfaction or fulfillment from her actions. While Brenda Aguero bears full responsibility for her crimes, the case also revealed significant systemic failures that enabled her to continue her deadly actions for months without detection. These institutional problems are as important to understand as the individual psychology of the perpetrator. The hospital's administration failed to recognize the pattern of unusual infant deaths and complications occurring in their neonatal unit. While any individual incident might have been explained as a natural medical occurrence, the cluster of 13 cases over such a short period should have triggered an immediate investigation. The reporting systems in place were inadequate to flag concerning patterns in patient outcomes. There was insufficient oversight of medication administration, particularly for dangerous substances like potassium that can be lethal in high doses. And there was a lack of proper protocols for investigating and reporting suspicious deaths to external authorities. Hospital Director Liliana Assis' conviction for concealing deaths from authorities highlighted the administration's failure to properly handle the crisis. Rather than immediately reporting the unusual pattern of deaths to external investigators, the hospital attempted to handle the situation internally, allowing Brenda to continue her crimes while the investigation languished. The conviction of Brenda Aguero sent shockwaves through Argentina's medical community and prompted significant soul-searching about how such crimes could occur in modern healthcare facilities. Medical professionals across the country were forced to confront the disturbing reality that one of their own had systematically murdered the patients she was supposed to protect. Nursing organizations in Argentina issued statements condemning Brenda's actions and emphasizing that her crimes were completely contrary to the ethical principles of the nursing profession. They called for enhanced training and oversight to prevent similar incidents in the future. Medical schools and nursing programs began incorporating new curricula focused on recognizing and reporting concerning behavior among healthcare workers. The goal is to create a culture where medical professionals feel empowered to report suspicious activity without fear of retribution or professional consequences. The case also prompted discussions about the psychological screening of healthcare workers, particularly those who work with vulnerable populations like newborns, elderly patients, or individuals with disabilities. While psychological screening has limitations and cannot predict future criminal behavior with certainty, it can help identify individuals who might be at higher risk for engaging in harmful behavior. Throughout this entire ordeal, from the initial incidents in 2022 through the trial and conviction in 2025, the families of the victims have endured unimaginable trauma and grief. Their stories, while heartbreaking, are an essential part of understanding the full impact of Brenda Aguero's crimes. The 5 families who lost their babies face a particularly complex form of grief. Not only did they lose their children, but they learned that their deaths were not natural or unavoidable, they were the result of deliberate murder by someone they trusted. This knowledge adds layers of anger, betrayal, and trauma to their already overwhelming grief. The 8 families whose babies survived Brenda's attacks face their own challenges. While grateful that their children lived, they must cope with the knowledge that someone tried to murder their babies and may have caused lasting health effects. They also struggle with questions about what might have happened if the crimes hadn't been discovered when they were. Many of these families have become advocates for reform in hospital oversight and patient safety. Their voices have been crucial in pushing for the systemic changes that have been implemented in response to this case. Their courage in speaking out about their experiences has helped ensure that their children's suffering was not in vain. The Brenda Aguero case has implications that extend far beyond the borders of Argentina or the field of healthcare. It raises fundamental questions about trust, institutional oversight, and the protection of vulnerable populations in society. The case demonstrates how individuals in positions of trust and authority can abuse their power to cause tremendous harm. This is not limited to healthcare settings. Similar dynamics can occur in schools, nursing homes, childcare facilities, and other institutions where vulnerable people depend on others for their care and protection. It also highlights the importance of robust oversight systems and the willingness of institutions to acknowledge and address problems when they occur. The initial failure to recognize and properly investigate the pattern of deaths at the hospital allowed Brenda's crimes to continue far longer than they should have. The case underscores the need for multiple safeguards and verification systems when dealing with vulnerable populations. No single person should have unchecked access to make life and death decisions, and there should always be systems in place to monitor and verify that care is being provided appropriately. The case of Brenda Cecilia Aguero stands as one of the most disturbing crimes in recent Argentine history. A young nurse, entrusted with the care of the most vulnerable patients imaginable, systematically murdered 5 babies and attempted to kill 8 others over a period of just a few months in 2022. Her conviction and life sentence in 2025 brought some measure of justice for the victims and their families, but the case continues to reverberate through Argentina's healthcare system and beyond. The institutional failures that enabled her crimes have prompted significant reforms, and the case has become a cautionary tale about the importance of oversight, transparency, and protection of vulnerable populations. Perhaps most troubling is that Brenda's true motivations may never be fully understood. Unlike some similar cases where perpetrators have provided explanations, however twisted, for their actions, Brenda has remained largely silent about why she chose to harm the babies in her care. This silence leaves families, colleagues, and society as a whole struggling to comprehend how someone could commit such heinous acts against innocent children. The 13 babies who became Brenda's victims, 5 who died and 8 who survived, will forever be remembered as the children who trusted the wrong person at the most vulnerable moment of their lives. Their stories serve as a reminder of the sacred trust that exists between healthcare workers and their patients, and the devastating consequences when that trust is betrayed. As we reflect on this case, we must remember that while Brenda Aguero's crimes were exceptional in their cruelty and scope, the vulnerability of the patients she harmed is shared by many others in our healthcare systems. Protecting these vulnerable populations requires constant vigilance, robust oversight systems, and a commitment to transparency and accountability at every level of healthcare delivery. The case of the Angel of Death in Argentina is now closed, but the lessons it teaches about trust, institutional responsibility, and the protection of the innocent must never be forgotten. In remembering these 13 babies and their families, we honor their suffering by working to ensure that such tragedies never happen again. Thank you for listening to tonight's true crime story. Rest peacefully, knowing that another story awaits you next time, ready to accompany you on another journey toward restorative sleep. But if you're still awake, don't forget to like and subscribe so you don't miss our next true crime stories. And until next time, stay safe and take care. Good night.